And you can't even drive? I can. Are you stupid, eh? Are you a stupid fool? Well, why can't you drive then? You can't even drive! A bit grey today, isn't it?
I'm here. Welcome. And I'm joined by Mr. D. How you doing, D?
Hello, I'm doing reasonably well.
Now, can you believe there are some people who've been talking about the ratings of this show? It's a little bit like talking about the ratings of the Bowls when it comes on BBC Two at 3 p.m. because it's public service television, or BBC Four, the arts channel. The show's never been about ratings.
Yeah, very, very, very strange. I mean, it's almost as if every so often you get this new wave of viewers who doesn't seem to understand you or your channel or the way things are generally done. And they certainly don't understand this program. I mean, if you go back through, first of all, it's called The Deepest Law. It's a deep exploration of things. And secondly, the idea that this show has ever been about mass appeal. I mean, all we do is talk about how the idea of the mass man has caused so much damage, and the idea of democracy has caused so much damage. And yet people come on and act as if the democratic opinion of people matters, or the fact that, maybe not that many people are interested in an in-depth stream about a particular artist from the 20th century. How very strange. I mean, look at the channel, get an idea of what you're getting into. And I mean, if that's your complaint, then I'm afraid this is not going to be a very happy place for you to be.
I will say though, we have now talked about Andy Warhol for longer than his famous film Sleep, I believe.
Very good, and slightly less interesting. Yes. No. It's fine. I mean,
Sleep was actually only 5 hours and 20 minutes, but he looped it.
Yeah, he looped footage, of course, because that's, very pop art. I mean, doing the easiest thing is a very pop attitude, and so of course he was not. That's sort of the wonderful thing about him is that he was not he wasn't afraid to cheat, But I'm actually quite proud of this series. I mean, as I mentioned last week, it is, I'm sure, the most granular, in-depth exploration of Warhol's work on YouTube at the moment. We've certainly shown more of Warhol's work and talked about it in more depth than I think anything, any other stream series I've seen. So I'm certainly proud about that. I don't have any issues with it. I mean, I get annoyed at the fact that we've just started the stream and there's 20 fucking thumbs down, because of course people come in here and do it as if your little thumb poking at my chest bothers me at all. It doesn't bother me at all, but it bothers me in the sense that it's irritating, sort of like a fly buzzing around my head when I'm trying to eat fish and chips at the seaside. But other than that, no. I mean, we're going to finish this series and we're going to be quite proud of it. If you don't like it, it's understandable. Then don't watch it. I don't understand people who come back week after week to bitch. Anyway,
can I just say that the Women's Hour only got 16 thumbs down last time? So.
Yeah, we're less popular than women talking about what do they talk about? I don't even know. Women's things. Yes. Well, anyway, we're here to talk about man's things, art and culture, which are appropriately masculine domains. So here we are.
Okay, are you ready then? So we're looking at a picture of Ronald Reagan.
We are looking at a picture of Ronald Reagan. These are pictures that Mr. Warhol took, of course. I should mention, of course, that we haven't gone into it too much. We will hit on it a bit in the stream, but Warhol worked in every sort of medium he could, that he could. I think I've mentioned in past streams that he wanted to have a book on the bestseller list, a popular film in cinemas, a popular art show in a gallery, a show on television. Like, he wanted to be the sort of king of media. And as part of that, of course, he was a prodigious photographer. I mean, obviously his work was quite predicated on using photography as a technique, but he also took an enormous number of photographs, both artistic and otherwise. Basically, he was an obsessive documentarian of his own life and experiences. And as we said, he, certainly as the 80s progressed, he had access to the sort of highest echelons of society. So we remember he did a poster for the Carter administration, and of course visited the Carter White House and such. Well, of course, he was perfectly happy to visit the Reagan White House when that came about in 1981.
I mean, after all, they were on the same side, Dee.
Yeah, exactly.
One bit of political commentary, but yeah.
And of course, as also mentioned in earlier streams, many of the people around Warhol were quite politically conservative. At this time, Bob Colacello, who's a journalist and writer, most famously, I think, still writes for Vanity Fair, but for 15 years, I think, he was associated with Warhol. At a point, he was the editor of Interview magazine, which was Warhol's magazine. And so Colacello had a lot of sway in directing Warhol's social and business activities. And Colacello was very valuable to the organization because he brought in a lot of portrait commissions. He hobnobbed with lots of very rich people, and he was, again, quite politically conservative. He wrote a biography, and Colacello wrote 2 biographies, one on Warhol and one on the Reagans. So he was sort of instrumental in kind of getting Warhol access to the Reagans and to all these sort of Republicans of the era. And actually, for a time, I believe Ronald Reagan's son's wife or fiance, Doria. No, it was his wife. Ron Reagan Jr.'s wife was an intern at Interview magazine, and so Ron Reagan Jr. makes appearances in the diary and such. So yes, I mean, and Warhol was very easily was a chameleon, and was able to kind of slip into any crowd, regardless of the political or social orientation or otherwise.
So let's
all right, go on.
Tuesday, October the 15th, 1981, New York, Washington, D.C., and also New York. We were early getting to the White House. We got in then, and then Nancy Reagan came in, and we were in the same room. And a waiter brought in 4 glasses of water. Doria was with us. We talked about drug rehabilitation, and it was boring. I made a couple of mistakes, but I didn't care because I was still so mad at being told by Bob not to ask sex questions. She had an assistant who sat there and took notes, and they said they weren't doing their own tape of the interview, but I'm sure they were. Bob had his tape recorder, and I had mine. I took 4 pictures. Mrs. Reagan gave Doria a piece of Tupperware. Tupperware? Not wrapped or anything. And she gave her 3 boxes of socks for Ron. Bob was telling Mrs. Reagan that she was such a good mother. He asked what they were doing for Christmas, and she said that they were going to stay at the White House because nobody ever stays at the White House. At 4:30, the interview was over. She and Doria talked for about 15 minutes while Bob and I waited to the side. Then we got a cab to the airport. I noticed that he didn't note the.
Oh yeah, he doesn't have that.
He's become kind of inconsistent there. Got to New York, called John at the office, gave Doria $20 for the cab. Oh, well, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
He didn't want to be redundant for the cab, and she dropped me. When I talked in the door, the phone was ringing, and it was Bridget asking me what kind of tea Mrs. Reagan served us. And then I started thinking, and I got madder. I mean, she could have put on the dog. She could have done it in a good room. She could have used the good china. I mean, this was for her daughter-in-law. She could have done something really great for this interview, but she didn't. I got madder and madder thinking about
it. So if you go on, you can see an image of this fatal meeting. So I do believe that Nancy Reagan was eventually on the cover of Interviewing magazine. So they did score a partial coup, but Warhol was again always dissatisfied if he felt that he didn't get the sort of best treatment.
Well, what's the point of going to the White House if you don't see the best china?
I know, or the best tea. I like the Tupperware as well. It's very good.
Now, can I just say something? We've watched a lot of interviews with Warhol where he's been very non-compliant with various journalists and so on.
Yeah.
But surely he couldn't act like that in this sort of company. He had to have been like at least decent company, otherwise they wouldn't ask him to go to places, surely.
Well, there were obviously different sides to Mr. Warhol. So he did have, there was quite a difference between his sort of public persona and the persona he put on, again, during interviews and sort of certain appearances, the stumbling, mumbling, oh gee, how great, thing that he did. But, he was also, of course, a completely normal, well, I wouldn't say completely normal person, but I mean, he was a very gregarious person, very talkative, full of ideas. And so in the proper circumstances, he would, be perfectly willing and able to carry on a normal conversation, or at least as normal as he could get. So I'm sure that, again, it was a different story with in this situation. But also people came to expect it. I mean, they sort of expected to get a bit of his, his peculiar locutions and mannerisms. So
the mask and the face of Andy Warhol. But it just makes me think. It just makes me think, though, Dee, because it's obviously a persona what he does, in front of the camera. But it just makes me wonder: is that part of his lifelong commentary on? Because I bet you anything that a lot of these people aren't the same when the camera's off. All politicians have a public mask and a private face, don't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, also Warhol was, I don't know if touched is the right word. I mean, he was obviously a deeply peculiar person, and as most sort of artists and creative people tend to be in one way or the other. So I think that there was a part of it that wasn't really calculated. There was a part of it, and there's lots of speculation, of course, now that he was on the autism spectrum. And I can certainly believe it. I mean, I tend to not like those sorts of pop post-mortem diagnoses, but it's, it's fairly compelling case when you sort of look at the totality of the way that Warhol kind of existed in the world. But yeah, I think also part of it was kind of commentary. I mean, he had a very subtle way of kind of, being horrible to people that he felt were sort of beneath his contempt. And often they didn't notice it, or often they took it as him being shy or him being, eccentric.
I relate to that deeply, Dee.
Yeah.
All right, let's carry on. So somebody in the chat is asking which song it is by Bowie, where he's talking about Warhol. It's literally called Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol, yes, it is.
Okay, what is going on here?
So this is, I think, 1981. Warhol was convinced by his friend Christopher Makos, who's a photographer, to do a series of photographs wearing drag. I put these in because have you ever seen speaking of David Bowie, have you ever seen the video for Boys Keep Swinging?
Oh, of course, yeah, many times.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's something about Warhol in drag that's as uniquely unconvincing as David Bowie in drag in that that particular video.
I mean, I think he looks all right. as in, I didn't immediately know it was him.
Yeah, but I mean,
we have a lower quality transvestite in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You're right. Fair enough. But I mean, it is again. You see an increasing in the 80s, as we'll encounter. You'll see an increasing kind of concern with adopting personae. Adopting one mask and one sort of.
I should mention, by the way, D, that Boys Keep Swinging video. People didn't know it was Bowie until he revealed himself at the end. Because he's that old woman as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not immediately. I mean, obviously we know, but it's not immediately obvious that they're all him until he, reveals himself. But anyway,
right. Go ahead. Next.
Okay. Yeah.
But as I said, you'll see this this sort of increasing adoption of kind of various personae.
He looks like Cher. He does.
Oh dear, dear.
Thursday, April the 9th, 1981, Vienna. Bruno came by and we had a really punctual meeting at 10:30 at the ministry with the Lady Minister of Culture in Vienna. We met the curator of my reversal show at the Vienna Museum of 20th Century Art. I forget his name, and we saw the beautiful catalogues and that they printed for the reversal show, which were all really long and slim. Then we went to the hotel and freshened up before the show at 6. I talked to Vincent in New York, and he said that my head sheet had come in from Zoli. Have I told the diary I've decided to become a male model? So then Fred got so overwrought, he thinks I'm crazy to start modeling, but it's something I want to do, so I ignored him. Chris said Fred's just jealous. So we got to the museum, and it was an unbelievable crush, open to the public, and I've never been in Vienna before, so this was see Andy now, or you'll never see him again. And that lasted for 2 hours. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good draw when you get older as anyone who's famous, right? See him now or see him. I mean, that was the pretext on which I saw Bob Dylan for the first 3 times. And that lasted for 2 hours. And I had to sign shoes and asses. And I didn't even look up once. Asses?
Yeah, people would have him sign their jeans. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Then finally...
Cleavage or whatever.
Finally, Christopher couldn't stand it anymore and said we had to leave. So I ran out past all the TV people and jumped into the car, and it took us to a Viennese restaurant where we had hot dogs, then to a great club called Checker, all young, good-looking kids, tango and old Elvis songs, and it was just the greatest. Chris and I, it does sound quite cool, actually. Chris and I took this adorable boy, Martin, back to the hotel, who we got him to take his shirt off, and then we got him to take his pants off too. And he had the craziest sort of op art underwear on. And we took pictures, and he did the best poses. And then we gave him the car to go home in. One thing I've learned from Chris is that if you tell anybody to do anything, they just do it, especially models and actors. And then I saw a telex from John Gould. He's back in New York, and it was a really nice note. And then I felt great.
Yeah, so John Gould is, of course, the man for the vice president, one of the vice presidents of Paramount Pictures, who Warhol was desperately trying to sort of manifest some sort of interpersonal relationship with at this time.
Do you think Do you think that there is something a bit weird about actors? They're kind of curiously empty vessels. I know Hitchcock famously described them as cattle once.
Yes.
But they are like weirdly compliant. They're so used to kind of doing anything for a part or whatever that they become these kind of strange Stockholm syndrome creatures who are just willing to do anything, basically.
Well, I think it says a lot about the kind of, the kind of tendency of, actors now to be, to be led into any sort of political movement, any sort of mouthpiece of the regime.
Well, look at the behavior around Harvey Weinstein.
Exactly. I mean, they will certainly. I mean, not all of them, but they will certainly. Many of them will do exactly as they're told, and they'll do anything for for a piece of the pie.
Yes.
And someone asked in the chat, how old was this boy? I mean, Warhol used the word boy in, I would say, the way that it's often used in kind of homosexual circles to mean a young man, but he was certainly not a pedophile. So I'm saying boy to Warhol was probably someone who was like 21, 22, who knows? But no, it wasn't that sort of thing. So
there he is.
So as he mentioned in this entry, I mean, at this period he did become a model. This is actually a page from the Zolly. Zolly was a modeling agency in New York, and Warhol became a listed male model. As you can see there, it says special booking only. So of course, Warhol.
That's pretty much the best he's ever looked in that picture.
Exactly.
It's been airbrushed a million times, I think.
Well, when he actually, you'll see some photographs from various modeling jobs, and when he has a really good makeup person, it really does make a difference. But to me, this is of course just another kind of art project. I mean, this is another part of his, all these strange conceptual tangents that he went on, and increasingly, he was the artwork. I mean, it's sort of ridiculous. I mean, again, this putty-faced, skull-like, pallid Eastern European, bald man in a wig, in his late 40s, becoming a model. It's a ridiculous idea, and yet he did it.
Do you think he's do you think he's got a lifelong project to show how actually capitalism is not at all anti-meritocratic? It's just like, if you can advertise it, you can sell it. It's basically literally, I can become a model if I want to.
Well, very early on, in one of his earliest kind of forays into fine art was a series of paintings called "Do It Yourself," which were basically flat-footed recreations of the type of paint by numbers pictures that used to be popular. And the implication, of course, was that, yes, I mean, in the milieu and context of contemporary art, and certainly contemporary American society, anyone could do it. You could become a product no matter what sort of person you were, no matter what you were selling. Everything could become a marketable item. And this strange child from Pittsburgh could literally become a male model, a celebrity, a person visiting the White House, a famous artist, an actor, whatever he wanted to be, he could be. So that was very much, I think, part of his project, and in a larger way, a part of the pop art ethos.
As like a kind of art Forrest Gump, if you want. He's just there. All these. Well,
I think if you've ever seen that film, that Woody Allen film called Zelig.
Yes, yeah.
This character that just sort of is everywhere. He appears in all sorts of places, pops up in all kind of time and history, and I think Warhol was a bit like that.
Do you know what I find very? I think Warhol, if he was around today, or if he had been around in the past, a decade or so, would have actually seen the modern world and social media in particular as extremely Warholian, because it's his basic ideas kind of ramped up to their logical extreme endpoint. Where I mean, it literally is do it yourself. Like now, basically everybody is a superstar with an Instagram profile, and
Yep.
every woman is basically also a low level model. This who constructs their own persona and carefully curates it online.
I mean, even people in our circles, like even someone like Poe the person, there's obviously, I mean, say what she will, but there's obviously a sort of, she understands that and presents herself as such. I mean, and not just women. I think everyone does it to some degree, but it's certainly manifest.
I mean, anyone who with an online presence does this to some extent, I suppose.
And of course, someone mentioned in the chat, Warhol's most famous quotation is everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes in the future. Yes. Something like that. I mean, he said it many times and there's many variations on it. But, I mean, this idea that again, that everyone is sort of an interchangeable node and can plug in and out of this huge machine of fame and marketing at one point or the other. Everyone will have some engagement with it, no matter how big or small in their life. And of course,
there are consequences to this as well, though, which, as I've noted before, which is that now everybody thinks their opinion matters, and they must air it, whether you like it or not. I'm pretty sure that's why people can't just not watch this stream. They must kind of loudly proclaim, "I'm not watching this."
Yep.
All right, okay. Tell the world.
I mean,
I'm not watching.
And again, it's part of the pernicious idea that this pernicious and egalitarian democratic idea that, of course, everyone is qualified to do and comment upon everything and anything, which of course isn't true.
There's also the strange phenomena these days of hate watching. I've been I'm a wrestling fan. We've talked about wrestling, and we've also talked about how wrestling was very Andy Warhol as well. But the weirdest thing is that wrestling's kind of been like, if you're a true wrestling fan, you'll kind of know that it's been a bit shit since about 2001. And the wrestling fans have got this kind of strange, like, Stockholm syndrome, where they watch it every week without fail, but they hate it. And the entire culture is basically talking about how much they hate the WWE. So, and it's persisted for like 15, 20 years. It must be a weird phenomenon. But I reckon there must be people who watch EastEnders or anything else like that, just to complain about the direction of it. I mean, look at Mauler. Mauler has an entire YouTube channel dedicated to just moaning about how much he hates Star Wars.
Well, it can be a legitimate form of criticism. I mean, obviously, one large strain of kind of critique, for a very long time has been the kind of dismemberment and deconstruction of things, but of course, it depends upon who's wielding the critic's sword, so to speak.
Let's continue.
Okay.
Monday, July the 26th, 1982. Got up at 9, going closer to the time when I was in the world, by the way. Got up at 9 a.m., called Nena at the hospital, talked to her doctor. They said the operation is in the morning and it'll be intensive care for 2 days afterwards.
So Nena was one of Warhol's live-in maids. So
this girl from Santa Fe, I like the fact that I think Carlyle would have liked the fact that he had a live-in maid. It's very
two sisters,
social bond build.
Yes, two sisters, Nena and Aurora Bugarin, I think was their surname.
This girl from, we were talking about the celebrities, like that is a kind of weird area where there must be these relationships of indentured servants, basically people who loyally serve a famous person for many, many years, and do so proudly, because they are, I don't know. I mean, you definitely see it in rock and roll, the groupie, 30-year groupie,
Yeah.
The girl from Santa Fe came by the office. She used to work at Interview. I can't remember her name. One of those girls, like from Aspen, who look deep inside you and want to know your true, real meaning. She reminded me of the kind of girl that would always be visiting Jed from California, that type. And she was after Augusto, and I got dead serious. And I told him to go back and not to come in the front until she was gone. I mean, I'm not going to let her ruin his life by looking for meaning in it. She left a note for him with her number on it, and I destroyed it. I didn't tell him about it. I'm not going to let her start trouble. What a bastard.
So I think Augusto was Nana and Aurora, his housekeeper's brother, who he for a while Warhol employed as a bodyguard. He was an ex-U.S. Marine, so Warhol did take care of his loyal staff. But I like that he's basically begone thought.
That is sly. And I kept running into Doria Reagan in her moo-moo. And I think I kept asking her if it was Perry Ellis. I was nervous about the fashion show. I was supposed to model at Studio 54 at 9:30. So I was drinking coffee all day and trying to be thin. Cabbed at Studio 54, $4, and couldn't find the back door. But a black bum found us. 50 cents.
to the pub.
Sorry, that's it's very Reagan's America. That inside there were 25 raving models and me, and they all had big baskets and tight underwear. I talked to Michael Holden and told him I couldn't believe he wasn't a movie star yet, but he didn't come out right because I was nervous. It didn't come out right because I was nervous. I had to go out twice. I was numbers 33 and 49. And then afterwards, Chris criticized my modeling, saying that since I'm older, I should walk proud and show who I am and not be shy and keep my head down. But I think I have to figure out a way to be more of a buffoon, to fall down or something. So here he is modeling.
Modeling. I mean, there's something sort of amazing about it. It's just like in many of the adverts that he's in, it's just like, insert this strange man peering over his shoulder.
We can definitely tell we're in the 1980s now.
Yes,
she's got some serious Nescafe Gold Polo Sport energy. This girl,
yes, she does.
Gold lipstick as well. But this is a bizarre turn in Warhol's career now. Modeling,
which he did for years after this. I mean, off and on, he did modeling for years, and eventually got into doing television adverts. So, next. It's another ad.
Ridiculous.
This is for Dior, I think. Yeah.
When the mouth was a little girl, she had asthma. She had to stay in bed and smoke long black asthma cigarettes that the wizard gave her. Oliver would race over after school to watch. The fuck?
I have no idea.
It's a high concept advert for Christian Dior. Wednesday, November the 18th, 1981. Went to my modeling job for Lumo Vogue, cab, $7, on West 21st Street. Way Brandy was there, and a hairdresser named Harry, an English kid, just funny and cute. And Way was wonderful. We talked about health foods, and he doesn't wear too much makeup for day. He looks very good. He had a lot of facelifts, and we talked about that. He goes to bed at 11 a.m., and then he gets up at 5 p.m. and spends 2.5 hours doing his yoga and everything. Way and the hairdresser each get $1,000 a day, so I'd like to hire him 25 times a year to make me up for special occasions. But he says he can only fit me in 6 times. That's pretty Chad. And then they left, and 2 other people came to do me up punk. A black guy and a hairdresser that named Mary Lou Green. And they had a blondie wig, so I would look like a girl. And then they made me up to look like Ronald Reagan too.
And you can see those if you go to the next slide.
Oh, here we are. Wow, he really looks like a little bit like David Bowie in the bottom. Not David Bowie.
Dylan.
Bob Dylan in the bottom left.
Really does, doesn't he?
He looks like Love and Theft era Bob Dylan. Bizarre.
I don't know what. I think they were going for a gangster there. I don't know, but I thought he really looked like Bob Dylan. So
and the Ronald Reagan one, it's kind of weird because he looks like I don't know if you've ever driven around America, but there is these giant statues all around the place. I saw the one I did with Route 66.
Yes, Route 66.
He kind of looked like one of those statues. Those kind of plastic. The hair looks plastic.
Well, I think it is. I think it's a weird kind of plastic Reagan hair thing that you know are very popular. I mean, Reagan was almost like sort of Trump. He was very easy to caricature, and so you see a lot of things from the 80s of Ronald Reagan, sort of Ronald Reagan, masks and things like that.
It's amazing what they can do though, because he genuinely looks better here than he has at any time.
Well, you can see the why Way Bandy got $1,000 to do a makeup job. I mean, he was really good. At the top right, I mean, he looks. It almost looks like a different person pretending to be Andy Warhol. So,
I mean, if they can make Andy Warhol look this good, maybe even these guys can make me look good looking. I reckon I'd look amazing. I could be a fucking model.
Anyone, they can make almost anyone look good. So,
I think I'd make a nice girl too. I got like long eyelashes. Old women used to tell me. Oh, you've got such nice long eyelashes. You'll have all the girls when you're older. That's what they used to say to me.
You won't be. You have all the girls. You won't be all the girls. Eh?
No. You'll have all the girls. Yeah.
So, of course, also in this period, Warhol was quite cognizant of the idea that he needed to increase his market in Europe. So you see a various series of works kind of coming out of this period where that are very obviously and specifically directed towards interesting European.
Can I just sorry to interrupt you, D. Somebody was saying this is the weirdest political, the political compass.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think of that. It is.
That's really funny.
It is very good. Who was that?
Because I think Reagan would be bottom. I think Reagan would have been bottom right.
Yes, certainly would have.
Yeah. All
amazing.
Right. Sorry.
So of course, Warhol, very consciously did what he considered art that would interest European collectors during this period. So it's almost like there was this parallel body of work that was only meant to be shown in Europe at the time, particularly like Germany. I mean, he also worked with a dealer called Bruno Bischofberger at this time, a Swiss art dealer. So he did sort of his career, which had always been quite focused in the United States, certainly went international. I also like this picture because I don't know if you recognize what that image is behind him.
I'm pretty sure it's a roulette wheel from a casino.
No, it isn't.
What?
No,
it isn't. Okay.
No, that is Warhol's painting. Well, does anyone in the chat? Can anyone in the chat identify what that image is? Okay, well, I'll tell you. It's a photograph taken in I think the late 1930s. I can't remember what it was when it was, but it is Albert Speer's Cathedral of Light, which he produced for one of Adolf Hitler's rallies.
Oh, that's amazing! That Cathedral of Light.
Yeah,
that's Albert Speer was genius, I tell you.
Yes. So yes, little known body of work that Warhol did of Albert Speer's light architecture.
He thought this would be appropriate to sell to the German market.
Well, exactly. This is what he sell to the Germans. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but he literally did that.
Because they're very touchy about that, the old Germans these days.
Very, very touchy about that. Well, again, it's ambiguous enough that you wouldn't know on first glance, you know.
But Speer, I will say, is the one Nazi it's all right to like for whatever reason. He's like I remember when I was doing history, he was kind of exonerated somehow by the teacher. He was like, "Oh yeah, Speer was all right, by the way." Like, I don't remember why that was.
Yeah, I did. I certainly got a condemnatory vibe, but yeah, I don't know. It's sort of interesting, of course, in the context of Warhol. Also, I mean, the idea of creating something that is meant to sort of signify a giant structure, but is actually nothing. You know, it's just light. You know, light beaming up the sky. And in a way, I think there's a strange analogous thing with Warhol's work. So
I do think, by the way, that the technological, artistic achievements of the Nazi era are a great embarrassment to the liberal establishment. It can't be really explained away in the same way that they can't point to the mid-century German and say, "Oh, you know, just like in Soviet Russia, there was real stagnation there." Because it didn't really happen in the same way.
No,
and yet they still go, "Oh yeah, but actually it's exactly the same." It's just totalitarianism.
Yeah, no, it's very easy to explain away if you count on the ignorance of most people.
Yeah, it's a very big part of the Boomer Truth regime. You know, Hannah Arendt.
Oh yes,
that sort of stuff, yeah. Anyway, let's carry on. What's this?
So this is him visiting. I can't remember which museum this is in. This is a portrait of Johann Goethe, and so again, I mean, he made a lot of visits to Europe. You know, beginning in the late 70s, early 80s, and as we'll see if you go to the next slide, began to produce bodies of work, you know, again aimed at the European market. So this is a.
I saw this hanging in one of your galleries. It's the sort of thing you like. So here's more of it.
You like this? You like Goethe? You know, I actually love that. I love that painting of Goethe. So I quite like these, but you know, it is. Warhol was very funny about doing this very obvious pandering. I mean, if you remember from the last stream, the portraits of Jews of the 20th century. I mean, you know, he was very good at kind of marketing to particular groups of collectors. And these Goethe pictures were a series of prints. I think there's 4 of them in the portfolio.
You know, there's something about this idea that is in the same conceptual ballpark, though, of like the sellers of tourist tat. You know, I don't know if you've ever been to like Rome or anything, but you know, you'll be like at the Roman Colosseum, and then there'll be, you know, people selling you'll be at the Vatican, and there'll be somebody outside selling flesh-colored Christ that glow in the dark.
Glow in the dark, yeah. Okay. So also at the time, Warhol produced several different bodies of work, which were basically details of artwork of sort of famous paintings. In fact, I think this particular image he used in a portfolio of details of Renaissance paintings. No, the hat isn't added. The hat was actually in the original picture. If you look up Goethe portrait, he's in it's sort of an Italian landscape. It's taken verbatim from the original. This is of course Botticelli, the head of Venus from emerging from the sea. Very famous image. But so again, Warhol is turning his exploration of kind of famous people and famous faces. He'd already done in the early 60s the Mona Lisa and returned to it with the reversals.
Just for my own knowledge, Botticelli Where does he rank in the old Renaissance masters typically? Why wasn't he made a turtle in the famous?
I have no idea. No
I don't
idea.
know.
I mean,
Botticelli was a top 4, like above even Donatello.
well, Botticelli was Botticelli was slightly, ever so slightly earlier than the other artists we associate with that core Quattrocento group. So,
even earlier than Raphael?
I believe he may have been slightly older than Raphael. I'd have to double check. I
seem to remember that Raphael was slightly earlier than the others as well. But just from endlessly walking around the bloody Vatican when I went there. Okay.
So if you want to go ahead. Yeah, so this is the portfolio of the Venus, but Warhol was I think it's also very important to note that Warhol's graphic style was very influential. I think certainly, I mean it was in the 1960s, but certainly in the 80s. I mean, it became very identifiable. I mean, the way he's working here is, it looks sort of superficially similar to the works that he'd done in the 60s and 70s. But of course, the work in the 80s is extraordinarily technically advanced. These images are very heavily manipulated. There's lots of different screens. There's lots of different sort of attention to kind of color gradations and he just has a very particular way of working and a very particular graphic design style that evolved in this period. And of course, this was both positive in that it was extremely influential on the larger kind of graphical culture, but it was also concurrent with his lowest sort of ebb in terms of art, criticism. I mean, this is the work that was hated by art critics of the time because, of course, it started to be he started to be so concerned with the idea of producing beautiful images. I mean, it sounds funny to say that basically art critics hated when anyone made anything that looked good, but it was certainly true in a certain milieu of art criticism that the idea of sort of producing appealing, beautiful images was a reason to dislike a body of work.
I bet you Alexander Adams doesn't like this period of Warhol. Well, maybe sit down and ask him one day.
You'll have to ask him. Go on. So I've actually grouped all these together. These are from slightly different periods from the early 80s, but I've put them together because these are all, again, artworks taken from other artworks. This is a De Chirico picture called The Disquieting Muses, which is a sort of famous piece of Italian surrealism. And, this is receiving the Warhol treatment. De Chirico is very interesting. I mean, if you look beyond, if you sort of think about why Warhol chose the particular images that he did in this series, De Chirico had a very groundbreaking and influential body of work in the early 20th century, 1910 to 1925. But De Chirico lived into the 1960s. In fact, he may have lived into the 1970s, and he spent a vast portion of his later life painting copies of the pictures that made him famous back in the teens in the 1920s. So in a way, I mean, De Chirico was very much a kind of figure like Warhol. This kind of idea of sort of replicating a moment and doing it again and again and again and again, and so much so that De Chirico's market is very muddled, because of course the original pictures that he'd done early on in the sort of emergence of surrealism are very valuable, but the copies that De Chirico did. And of course, he hand painted them. They're still De Chirico paintings. They're all slightly different, but the copies, of course, are worth much less. And of course, they're much less highly regarded as being important in art history. So, he was a very curious example of a person who ended up basically spending most of his career replicating his successful period endlessly. So I do think that's why he appealed to Warhol so much.
Okay, can I just ask a couple of things? Incidentally, I know of this artist, by the way, through David Bowie. Do you know what the connection is?
Not offhand, I don't.
Do you remember the song "Loving the Alien" from Tonight?
From Tonight, yes.
If you watch the video of that, Bowie is almost a De Chirico painting come to life in that video. So that's how I know of it, because I had this book called, I don't know, it's like a guide to David Bowie basically, and it had this little factoid in there that the video was about. The video was inspired by this artist.
No, I've not seen it.
I'd recommend it. It's a good, underrated song too. But I have a couple of questions here. One is, what was this chap's relationship, if any, with Dali, who's the surrealist painter that everybody knows? And
I don't know that they. I don't know that they had a particular relationship. Obviously, they certainly would have known of each other's work, and obviously would have been influences on each other. In fact, De Chirico probably influential on more of an influence on Dali because he was slightly older than Dali and came slightly earlier than Dali. But but again, Dali was Spanish and spent most of his his career either in Spain or in the United States. So I don't know that he would have personally been involved with De Chirico, but Warhol met De Chirico. I mean, he actually made a film. He made one of his screen tests of De Chirico. So, and of course, Warhol also was friends with Salvador Dali. So, I don't know the particular connection between Dali and De Chirico.
And then the other comment I had is that the surrealists, out of all of the kind of modern artists, are the ones that I think that the trucks would most like. Why is that, do you think?
Dali.
I think people who usually write off modern art would have time for both Dali and De Chirico for different reasons.
Yeah, I think less De Chirico because, of course, De Chirico's some of De Chirico's best work is quite challenging. Some of it, maybe a little more accessible than others. But Dali, I think, because Dali's style was so influenced by 17th century Spanish painting, Velázquez, most notably, I think it appeals to people because it looks like art. It looks like, what people think good art should look like. It's very smoothly painted. It's very sort of quote realistic, even though of course it isn't at all. And it's very sort of traditionally constructed, even though of course the particular images in Dali are very strange, but but they're also highly traditional. I mean, Dali was as much a traditionalist as he was an iconoclast. I think if people looked into Dali, they wouldn't be so quick to embrace him because, if people are calling Warhol subversive, then you do a little looking into Dali. In fact, if you want to know about Dali, you can tune into Ferro. Ferro did I think 3 streams going over the life and work of Dali, and so you can check those out on Ferro's channel. I'm sure they got into Dali detail. It's been a while since I watched those streams, so I can't remember precisely. But yeah, I think that Dali's superficial relationship to classical Spanish painting is the reason he's slightly more accessible.
Yeah, I think one of the little I'm trying to remember now because I went to Dali's like the Dali world or wherever.
Oh yeah, the castle
in Barcelona, right? That castle with the egg on it, and I seem to remember that sometimes in Dali you get these tiny little figures.
Yes.
I think that's a direct influence from this chap. If you look at his early work, he's got like I think there's one where there's like a tower and these two tiny little figures in the distance.
Yep.
And I think that Dali basically lifted that idea and used it many times in his paintings and things.
Yeah. Although I mean, that is also a kind of traditional idea in painting. I mean, often used to show the sublime the sublime aspect of nature. In other words, there is a very specific sort of type of painting that uses very small kind of human and animal figures contrasted with a vast landscape, again to show the kind of sublime and eternal and overwhelming aspect of nature and the natural world compared to man.
Yeah, the one I just typed in De Chirico Tower, and apparently the painting is called Nostalgia of the Infinite.
That's Nostalgia of the Infinite, yes, yes.
Which is a bit like me. I've got infinite nostalgia. Anyway,
also you would be interested because De Chirico was quite Thomas the Tank Engine pill. There's quite a number of De Chirico paintings with choo-choos. With slightly menacing choo-choos in them. So I'll
he did a lot of towers, by the way. There's the Great Tower and the Red Tower and various. WBH was into towers as well, by the way. Must have been a thing in the 1910s to be into towers in this way. But all right, yes, let's carry on.
Let's move on.
Oh, here we go. This is Munch.
Evald Munch, yep. The cry, the scream.
This is probably one of the most famous paintings of all time, isn't it?
Yes, it has certainly become an extraordinarily famous picture. Mostly in the 1980s and afterwards, I think is when it became sort of so well known and endlessly parodied. There are actually several versions of this picture. I mean, again, Warhol has chosen the subject quite carefully in that everyone is familiar with this image, but there isn't one definitive version of this picture. I believe that Evald Munch did. There are 4 or 5 versions. One of which is a lithograph, which I think is the source of Warhol's prints. So, which is black and white, and Warhol's colored it. But Munch also did, I believe, 4 paintings or pastel drawings. And so, what people are familiar with is kind of an amalgam of the various versions of the Scream.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So there's not like one definitive one.
I would say the definitive image that most people associate is the black and white print version, the lithograph version of the Scream, is the one that people would be most familiar with. I think the colored versions, they will recognize the colors, but I think that the most famous image, and I think the source of the one Warhol did is the lithograph. So and some of I think 1 or 2 of them are in private hands, and there's one at the Munch Museum, which was famously stolen. I think several times it was stolen, and it's been recovered each time. But
can I? Sorry to go back a moment. Have you heard of a painter called Leonardo Creminini?
Leonardo Creminini. Seems familiar, but I can't offhand.
Never mind if you haven't. But I have a copy of Louis Althusser's Lenin and Philosophy, that has a front cover by Creminini, and I thought it was very reminiscent of the last artist we were looking at, but so I was double checking to see if it was him, but apparently it's not. It's Leonardo Creminini. But anyway, let us carry on.
Yep. So go to the next. So these are again another. This is actually a painting that has two famous images by by Munch. The left picture is a portrait of Eva Merdocchi, and the right is a self-portrait with skeleton arm. And again, two very well-known pictures by Eva Munch that Warhol, sort of replicated during in this series. Go back. You've skipped ahead too much. Yeah. Next. No. All right. So this is a detail of. Oh. Hang on a second. Yeah, so this is one of the pictures from the details of Renaissance pictures. This is an Annunciation by Leonardo da Vinci. This series was sort of focusing in on small aspects of these paintings.
Somebody in the chat has said this is the remix years.
Very much. I mean, that's sort of what he's doing. I mean, basically doing visual remixes of famous works. So, next up, this was a series of prints and paintings of Alexander the Great. So, and again, these are all. No, you've skipped ahead too far. These are all part of this series meant to appeal more to the European market, the very self-conscious desire to kind of push into a different market. So there is an aspect of Warhol that we've mentioned in the past, but we really haven't kind of touched on, and I think becomes almost his apotheosis in the 80s, which is his relationship to God and his relationship to religion. Obviously, in the history of art, certainly in Western art, sort of religion and spirituality is a major theme. It's a major subject of work. The earlier, sort of early artists that we associate with the kind of Western European tradition will have almost exclusively been commissioned by the church or by patrons to do religious icons, religious images. And I think that this continued, this tradition kind of continued. Of course, in the 20th century, the relationship between artists and religion began to sort of wane. And there was a much less kind of direct association between artists dealing with the subject of religion and spirituality. Warhol was a Catholic, an Eastern Rite Catholic, as we mentioned, from the first stream. He was brought up in the Catholic Church, in Eastern Rite Catholic churches, and it's probably a bit of a surprise, but Warhol attended church for his entire life. Sometimes daily went to church, and went to mass almost every Sunday, which given what we know about Warhol, his associations with the underground and with counterculture, I think it's a bit surprising to people, and I think it's also quite kind of unique, and it's sort of in a way, he was one of the last people I mean, in terms of someone who is very sort of famous and well known in his association with the contemporary art world and with the commercial gallery scene and museums and the New York art scene of the time, who was also a religious person. It almost seems impossible now. I mean, I think that if you were this type of person, if you were in the particular situation that Warhol was in, you would have great difficulty operating in this world now, because I think there's such hostility to the idea of religiosity, a person with spirituality. And it's a great dichotomy of Warhol, and it's very much a part of this idea that he was sort of multitudinous, and that he had various personae, and that somewhere in this, in this fog of wigs and modeling and all of his kind of public presentation, there was a private person. There was a person with fears and beliefs and desires, and he did spend a lot of his career almost trying to erase that person. I mean, to the extreme that he actually had his face altered in the, famously in the late 1950s. But there was a private side to him, and part of that private side was his devout relationship and faith in the Catholic Church. So,
yeah, it is probably a strange question, and I do not mean to psychologize, but how much of this do you think comes from his closeness with his mother that we've talked about before? Because it seems like he always wanted to at least keep a line open, like, to her and the idea of her and so on. And I wonder if somewhere he was thinking, well, I want to kind of continue the legacy of my mother in a strange way. Any thoughts on that? Does he talk about it anywhere?
He doesn't. No, he mentions his mother very infrequently in the diary. Of course, she died in 1971 or 72, I think. She became, demented, and she went back to Pittsburgh, and was put in a care home, and where she died. And he does mention once that he still feels guilty about making that decision, but it's certainly not something that comes up a lot with him. He's very, very private in terms of expressing that sort of emotion, and actually for years he would tell people, when people would ask about his mother, and he would say, "Oh, she's fine." I mean, this was for years after she died. That was his standard response, "Oh, she's all right, she's fine." But I certainly think in terms of religion, she was a big influence. I mean, she was a very devout Catholic, and it was a very large part of her life, and she was very sort of instrumental in bringing up all the children, all of her children, in the faith. They went to mass, religiously, so to speak, and also it was she had private devotions in her home. She had icons and images, as a Catholic certainly of that variety would have. And so Warhol grew up immersed in this. I mean, I'm certain that obviously there would be a degree of a sense that it was a place of refuge. It was a comfort that he could return to. The kind of solidity of this religious upbringing and this association with his mother. But I also don't want to kind of engage in a sort of psychological dissection. I mean, I think that also, yes, of course, it's important that you're brought up in a faith, and that's where you're going to have a foundation in that faith, and it's important that your parents, promote that. But I also think that it's much more complex than that, and I think that I don't know if you remember that quote, that after Warhol was shot, there's that very sort of revealing quote that he made to the Village Voice. In fact, I'll pull it up because it's quite pertinent, I think, to the body of work that we're going to see in the 80s. Before I was shot, I always believed I was watching TV instead of living life. Right when I was being shot, I knew that I was watching television. Since I was shot, everything is such a dream to me. I don't know whether or not I'm really alive, whether I died. It's sad. Life is a dream. I wasn't afraid before, and having died once, I shouldn't feel fear. But I'm afraid. I don't understand why. I'm afraid of God alone, and I wasn't before. And I think that he remained in that state for the rest of his life. I mean, it certainly, it was such a traumatic experience. And I think that forever after that, he was haunted by this idea of making himself right before God. Because, of course, this would have been something that he was brought up hearing and understanding, that this was, the eternal salvation of your soul. And I think it was a tension that was always there. I mean, even after, of course, even well after he was shot, during the time that he was attending church, sometimes daily, the time he was attending mass every week, he was also participating in things that are unequivocally, evil. I mean, he was associating with people and participating in things that, are objectively against the faith of a Christian. But who isn't? I mean, the thing is, we're all sinners. If you're a believer in the faith, then you will understand that everyone is fallen and that everyone is bathed in sin, and everyone has, of course, temptations and failings. And Warhol was no different. I mean, he was on top of all of this persona. He was a man, alone, as he said, before God. And so this is something I think he wrestled with, as we all wrestle with it. I mean, he did it in a very public way, but I do think that that private struggle started to become more and more public, as we'll see in the work that he produced in the 80s. I mean, this series, so these are the crosses, which came in 1982. This was the first sort of open manifestation of his obsession with, and his deep sort of relationship, and his complex relationship with the church and with God and with religion. And it would continue. And of course, as he's bringing this subject into his world, this world of soup cans and Marilyn Monroe and Mao and hammers and sickles and skulls, as I said, the undercurrent to me of all of Warhol's work is this relationship to death, this relationship to the finality of life and to the dispensation of the soul. And of course, with his earlier work, it was very much a kind of focus on mortality, the death of the body, the car crashes, the disasters, the death of Marilyn Monroe, the death of, of the people that he worked with, of Edie Sedgwick and his various superstars. But I think increasingly in the 80s, the concern went from the idea of the death of the body to the fate of the soul. And I think as he began to sort of engage openly with religious subjects, it was a very interesting sort of relationship with the way he treated images before and the way he treated images, as his life came to a close. And so it's strange to think of Warhol's work as transcendent, but I think that somewhere this exploration of the surface of things, the superficial aspect, this aspect of fame, this aspect of the disintegration and meaningless of material life, gave way to something else. And I think we'll see it increasingly in some of these bodies of work that come out in the 80s. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm. This is a rude.
And these paintings are some of these paintings are massive. This is an extremely confrontational picture, extraordinarily graphically simple and strong and large. You're being confronted with this. Have you forgotten? Have you forgotten the sacrifice of Christ in your life? And it's almost like he's asking himself these questions. Go to the next.
More.
Yeah. And also, as with Warhol's work, there is an extreme interest in the idea of repetition. The repetition, of course, of the way they're produced. They're produced with silk screens. The images can be reproduced. The original of this is a photograph of crucifixes on a table. He basically bought a handful of crucifixes and arranged them on the table and took a photograph, and that's the source of the silk screen of these images. It's actually very small personal crucifixes, but also, I think there's a very interesting relationship between the repetition in Warhol's work, this ongoing theme in his work over the years, and the idea of repetition in spiritual practice. And of course, not just Christianity or Catholicism, but repetition is very important to many faiths. That you repeat prayers, that you repeat rites, that you repeat rituals, whether it be meditation or mantra or saying the rosary, the repetition of these ideas and the repetition of these words and the repetition of these experiences and devotions to God are very important. And so I think it's very interesting that, of course, repetition, as Warhol used it before, was about kind of the disappearance of meaning, the repetition until there's nothing left, the draining out of meaning, the draining out of feeling, the draining out of humanity. And it's almost like he suddenly says, well, repetition can actually be additive. Repetition can actually be a positive thing, being a building up of religious faith, being a building up of confidence in God and confidence in the fate of the soul. So it's almost there's a reversal. And of course, we had that whole body of work called the Reversals. I think Warhol's career had a kind of a reversal in the late 70s and early 80s, as he sort of, and I don't know how much of this was conscious, I don't know how much he ever thought about this, but I think it's there. I think it's quite clear that something changed in the relationship he had to images and the relationship he had maybe to himself and to his own coming to terms with his fate and his aging, and his place in the world.
Yeah, for some reason when you were talking, I was reminded a little bit of Samuel Beckett. Okay, in Beckett's plays, there is a lot of endless repetition, mundane repetition. There's one play he's got called Happy Days, where there's this woman who's buried up to her waist in sand, and as the play progresses, she gets progressively more and more buried until in the end she's like literally up to her neck buried, and then I think by the end like she's completely buried. Okay, so you can think like, well, what's that metaphor for? But basically she does the same thing every day, and she's got this husband who's there who just doesn't talk. She endlessly talks. He doesn't say anything. He just like reads the newspaper and goes about doing like little chores and things. But essentially the same thing happens. The same thing endlessly loops. You see this all the way through Beckett's work. And I remember I did I did my master's dissertation on this, and one of the conclusions I came to is that Beckett was influenced by Camus, right? Who had this idea of human life as the myth of Sisyphus. He pushes the boulder up to the top of the hill, the boulder falls down again, then he pushes it back up and then it falls back down again. And obviously, for Camus, this was despairing, and ultimately, he took his own life. But I came to the conclusion that Samuel Beckett saw something profound in the endless repetition and made peace with it, i.e., that humans find a deep comfort in the endless ritual, whether it's just like brushing your teeth and so on and so forth. And I wonder if Warhol, with his endless repetitions, including his church going, was tapping into something of this. That there's something about the mundane everyday structures that endlessly loop that give people comfort. That people like routine in a way. But then, as against that, obviously we did Evil a Day recently, and he was a big critic of the Catholic Church, and he always talks about empty ritual. And I wonder if we might think about reconciling these two things here. What do you think about? Because people do criticize the idea that you go to church. Some people say it's quite boring. It's the same thing over and over again. Is it tapping into something deeper in us, or is it empty ritual? What do you think?
I think it depends upon you, and depends upon your particular mental state, your soul, your faith. Of course, anything can be either pleasure or pain. Anything can be dark or light. Anything can be, meaningless or full of meaning. Obviously, to a person that has no faith, these things aren't going to make sense. These ecstatic states, these meditations, the words of of Christ, the words of the word of God. It's not going to mean anything. It just depends upon how you come to it, I suppose.
I must make a correction here. Apparently, Camus died in a car crash. He didn't commit suicide.
Yeah, I was wondering about it. I didn't want to. I couldn't remember, but I thought he didn't commit suicide. But
I find that surprising.
Yeah. Anyway, also someone noticed astutely that there are 12 crosses in these pictures. Which, of course, is a quite meaningful number because there were 12 apostles, and so forth. But this is just a shot of, this is 860 Broadway, which is studio until the early mid 80s, and you can see some of the works, but this was probably around 82, 83. And you can get an idea of the sizes of the size of the crosses pictures. Yeah, the 12 stations of the cross. Yeah, someone mentioned.
Monday, September 20th, 1982. It was a busy day, but I left early to catch Lana Turner at Bloomingdale's, $8. Bought one of her books, $16. Then went up to her and she said, "I don't think I want to talk to you. I've taken you out of my prayers. And you said I was better when I haven't found God. So now I pray for you badly." So I think it was something I said to Faye Dunaway interview. I guess she read it. I didn't know what to do. I was a nervous wreck. I said, "Oh no, Lana, you've got to pray for me. Please put me back into your prayers." And I said, "Oh, won't you please autograph your book for me?" And she finally did and wrote to a friend with a question mark, and then "God bless you" with another question mark. And Lana and her fairy hairdresser and I were all there with the same hair. So there we go.
Go on. So this is St. Vincent Ferrer, which was on Lexington Avenue, on the east side, upper east side, New York. And this was Warhol's church, and where he went, as I said, sometimes daily to pray and weekly to mass. So this was a huge feature in his life. Very interesting, of course. This is not an Eastern Rite Catholic church. This is this is the sort of a standard Catholic church. So, but he does. I do think at one point in the diary he mentions that he crosses himself in the Orthodox way rather than in the standard way.
What's
But
the orthodox way?
it's the opposite direction from side to side, I believe.
So
Don't quote me on that.
Right, left.
Up, down, right, left,
Left,
or left, right instead. Yeah, I think it's
left, right. Okay.
yeah, it's the horizontal direction has changed, but yeah, it's a very nice church if you're ever in New York.
Look at those high rises behind.
I know.
Yeah.
I had a hard time finding a good picture of this church.
Okay, there's inside.
Yeah.
Is this in the financial district? This church?
No. This is in, I think, 81st Street, 82nd Street, and Lexington. So it's the Upper East Side. Not far. So Warhol lived on East 66th Street. So it's about 15 blocks, I think, from his house. So all right.
Okay.
So this is another portfolio that came from this period. This is the Endangered Species, and I include this because, of course, these are these are very popular images of Warhol's. I mean, you see these all over the place. They're also probably some of his most technically advanced prints. This was a portfolio, I think, from 250 impressions. I can't remember the edition size, but they're very complex prints. Some of these, there are like 10, 12 silk screens and 12 registrations. So anyone that has sort of done printing will know the kind of complexity of these images. But I quite like them, these images. But again, his print work was very much sort of targeted towards getting different groups of collectors, aka people like animals. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do a portfolio of animals. People like Goethe. So I'm going to do a portfolio of Goethe. People like Mickey Mouse, whatever. And of course, this is one of the things that was so annoying to kind of serious quote art critics of the time. This sort of open commercial aspect to his career. But I think that was certainly he was just open about it and honest about it. I think that's always going to be a concern when you're a professional artist. You need to sell things, and so.
Did you know the panda is no longer endangered? It is.
It's
been declassified to or downgraded to just being vulnerable now. So
because China has a whole industry breeding pandas now. So yes, I think China led the charge. And there's you can get lots of places in China you can see roly-poly pandas. In fact, I think someone mentioned bald eagles aren't endangered either. Some of these animals are no longer endangered. They were at the time. Of course, keep in mind this is, I think, 1982. So
how's my favorite doing, the tiger? Has that made her come back out?
That's the Siberian tiger, I think. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, so but also there's always also a question why has Warhol chosen the subject that he has, and so you could certainly also perhaps say that I'm almost surprised that he didn't end up as a print in this series as an endangered species himself. But it's again an interface with the idea of death. I mean, you're looking at, of course, these colorful, appealing pictures of animals, which people have quite positive feelings about and quite sort of protective feelings about. But these are also animals who are disappearing and dying out and going away. And so even in this series, there's an implicit relationship to the idea of disappearance and death. Where you would least expect it. So I think, again, it's just an overarching concern that runs through all of Warhol's work without fail.
Incidentally, the tiger population has made a bit of a resurgence in recent years as well. They're back up to 5,500 tigers in the world. So, which is
Why is that low? That's
well, you say that low. It was much lower at one point. That's after like a 30% increase in India. Most of them are in India, but anyway, let's carry on.
Go to the next. I just popped a couple of details of some of the prints in there.
A zebra's in danger.
It's a particular zebra. I should have the. I do have the information. Let me look it up. So that is Gravy's zebra. So it's a particular species of zebra. Yeah. And it is that's a Siberian tiger, so that's different than the standard orange and black tiger that we know. The other animals, in case people are curious: African elephant, bald eagle, the bighorn ram, the black rhinoceros, the giant panda, the orangutan, and the San Francisco silver spot, which I think is that butterfly. So. I put the zebra and the elephant because they're such amazing technical prints. They're really extraordinarily done. So yeah.
Now what's this?
So this is quite an unknown series that Warhol did at the time, 1983, and so these are the toys. And so, obviously Warhol was an obsessive collector of anything and everything.
Give me 1 minute, D. You carry on talking. I just need to do something. Hold on.
Okay. So Warhol was an obsessive collector of objects, both high and low. He collected, of course, very valuable antiques. He collected American Indian rugs and blankets and objects, quite valuable things. He collected jewelry, but he also collected sort of pop art. He collected commercial signage. He collected, vernacular statues, cigar Indians, anything and everything. And so he had a collection of toys from various periods around the world. There's sort of Soviet ones, and there's cheap Hong Kong toys from the 1960s. And he produced this series, again, a fairly unknown series of paintings of details from the boxes of these toys. And Warhol, being someone who started as a commercial artist, always had a deep interest in commercial art in all its manifestation, even its slightly tawdry and tacky manifestations, like a Hong Kong toy from the 1960s. So I think of these as sort of a kind of celebration of a particular ephemeral type of graphic design that most people wouldn't see, and that would of course disappear from the world quite quickly. These are not brand name toys at all. These are kind of cheap, toys that come and go.
I've been interested in this kind of slightly creepy kind of toy gone wrong aesthetic. I'm reminded a little bit of the artwork that you sometimes see on ice cream vans, the fake Mickey Mouse with the weird eyes.
Yeah, sort of badly painted.
If you ever go to outside of the first world, you kind of see this. I went to Iran a few times. You see kind of like slightly wrong artwork like this.
Yeah.
And I kind of like it.
Yeah. So if you want to just scroll through these quickly. I did put them with after the Endangered Species, because of course it's a very Warholian thing to do sort of prints of sort of grand prints of endangered animals, and of course these tawdry,
I've always wanted to go in a sidecar.
Oh, if you're not been, that's quite fun.
I've not been in one.
It's quite fun. It's quite fun, yeah. And of course, and I also like some of the animals, like appear in both series. You know, of course, got the Panda, and then you've got the toy Panda. You know, you've got the robots. Yeah.
This is slightly. You could use one of that. You could almost use one of those as a de-avatar. Take the head of that. Okay. Yeah. I grew up in when I was like 2, I was in Singapore. When I was a kid, I had kind of a cachet of like slightly weird toys from that had been bought in Singapore. all their eyes was just a little bit strange. I also had this book of like fuzzy felts. I don't know if you ever had those, but they had weird eyes as well.
No.
So yeah.
So those are the toys. I mean, a very minor series, but I sort of thought that they're quite interesting. And he would also these are all quite small pig paintings, 8 inches by 10 inches. Some of them. I don't think he did any larger prints of any of the toys. So he would often give these types of small paintings as gifts, although less the toys because they were slightly more complex to paint. But he did have a cachet of some of his smaller works that he would often give to people as gifts.
Somebody saying toys from North Korea. You know, I love the idea. I quite like this. One of my favorite series of his. Okay.
Okay. So Raw Satch, yes. So this is a series that I think 1984, 85. And this, remember last stream I talked about the idea that he had these sort of parallel bodies of work, that he had his kind of representational work that used the silkscreen, but he also had these abstract works. I mean, we think of the oxidation paintings, the piss paintings, or the shadows. So this, I think, is also part of that strain of his work, which was producing, as I said, what he called the Raw Satch paintings. Now, famously, that is a psychoanalytic test. I don't know a lot about it. I do know that, of course, the actual Raw Satch images, there's a series of them, and they're all the same. So that it's actually a quite small number of these images that are standardized and used as a test. They're not just random ink blot images. So, of course, Warhol's, even though the paintings are called Raw Satch, none of them are actually, they're not reproductions of the original Raw Satch images. The way these were produced was the way that the original Raw Satch images were produced, which was to spread paint on the canvas in a kind of random way, and then fold the canvas over and press it, press the unpainted half against the part you just put paint on, and then unfilled it. So you get this kind of mirrored image. And if people can think back all the way to the first Warhol stream, Warhol's graphic design technique, which he became famous as a commercial illustrator, used a very similar technique where he would draw with ink. He would have 2 sheets. He would have a sheet of paper and then have another sheet of paper taped to it. And he would draw with ink, in bits and pieces. And so he would draw a bit and then flip the one piece of paper over and blot it against the wet ink. And it produced almost a kind of print. It was like a monotype, a one-off image. And it had a sort of particular look, a kind of fuzzy, blotted line, and that was many of Warhol's famous commercial illustrations were done that way. So this is an almost strange throwback to that early technique in his commercial days. But of course, these are related to what I call Warhol's abstract work. But of course, they're not. They're both abstract and not. And of course, they call to mind those Raw Satch images, which are meant to be psychoanalytic tools, that you look at these images and your particular, your brain looks at these images. Pareidolia is the word, when this was mentioned, I think in last stream, the idea of humans looking at clouds and seeing shapes and seeing identifiable things.
I don't know what it says about me, but once I point this out, you won't be able to unsee it either, right? Evil Mickey Mouse sperm genie. On the right and on the left. You see him? You see it? Evil Mickey Mouse
no.
sperm genie. Can you see?
Yes.
Now you'll never be able to unsee evil Mickey Mouse sperm genie.
That is how the pause infects you, the evil Mickey Mouse sperm genie.
And you know, it's psychologically interesting because we had been primed to see that because we'd just been talking about Mickey Mouse.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's how the Raw Satch test works. You know, I mean, you know, because of course they're standard images, there will be standard kind of interpretations. And you know, do you remember at the end of Clockwork Orange when Alex is in hospital, and that nurse, that very bubbly, friendly nurse comes and shows him those images, and he's supposed to say what he's, you know, sees, and she shows him like eggs, and he's like, "I want to smash them," and then he, you know, laughs like a maniac. Well, this is a bit like that, of course, you know, and also again, this is Warhol kind of attacking the idea of abstract expressionism, you know, because of course, you know, they look a bit like, you know, Franz Klein or Robert Motherwell, one of these serious abstract expressionists from the 1950s, but they're just sort of paint blottings, you know.
I'm going to keep going. Look, this figure in the middle here, right? In the middle, you see, based Avolian Zen mage. Look, you can see him kind of meditating, but also like shooting fireballs. See that?
It's like a Tama Buddha shooting fireballs. Yes.
Yeah, like a kind of Zen Buddha mage.
Oh dear. Anyway, so but I think it's a slightly clever and slightly acidic comment on the idea. You know, what do you see in this painting? You know, it's also the way that people, you know, that sort of midwits look at abstract paintings. You know, they stare meaningfully at Jackson Pollock and they try to think about what they can see. What do you see in it? And in a way, Warhol's kind of clinicalizing that. You know. Well, what you see in it is, you know, is related to this psychological test battery. You know, it's almost like a kind of meta commentary on people's, you know, need to kind of find representation amidst things that have no representation at all. You know, there's nothing in these images.
I'm gonna keep going. Do you see these? Do you see this little head down here? Right. This is a little old man. There's his nose. Right. There's his eye. And he's kind of one of those old men who's lost his teeth and he's become quite gummy. See that? gummy old man.
You've got to stop this. Go to the next slide, please. we'll go through these quickly before you do your interpretations.
Oh dear.
Oh God.
Where's all damage? Okay. All right.
Next.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So these are the Raw Satch paintings. Yeah, you can. There's three more.
See, you know, I've been primed by all of my DJ Velvet Glove stuff to see something satanic in this one. Something kind of goat-like Satan beast.
Oh yeah, Moloch. Yeah. So, well, speaking of Satanism, I can't confirm this because I don't follow hip hop, but I think that Jay-Z has used one of Warhol's Raw Satch paintings as a cover for one of his records. So someone will have to fact check that, but I seem to remember coming across that.
Yes. Now here I see it. If you can see, somebody's kind of lying prostrate. There's the stupid little arms. All right, let's carry on.
Yeah.
More Moloch. And look down here. There's a figure kind of celebrating. Can you see? There's the clasp hands.
Yeah.
It's like World Cup '66. Can you see? Yay!
Yeah.
Yay!
Yay! Enforced fun.
Oh dear, oh dear. Okay. Okay, who's this?
Okay, so this is we're throwing in a very, very important figure in Warhol's life, late life. So this is Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Jean-Michel Basquiat was a young, middle-class fellow, who grown up in New York, and he became what in the early 80s he became associated with the kind of graffiti art and the street art movement that was a very big thing at the time. And I know all about it. I know all about this fellow, by the way, Dee, for reasons that you already know. I know the reasons that you already know. Yes. So Jean-Michel, I mean, I think he was born in the 1960s. You know, he was a young man at this period, but he's sort of emblematic of the kind of phenomenon of the meteoric 1980s art celebrity. And so basically, he went from, you know, selling his designs on T-shirts and postcards on the street to having major sold-out shows at Marylebone Gallery and Nose Eye Gallery and others throughout the 1980s. I mean, he became extraordinarily successful, and of course,
was he astroturfed in affirmative action? Do you think?
Not in the way that he would be today. So no, I mean, he was sort of, part of his appeal was this sort of mythos of him as the kind of authentic, untrained, you know, lower class black graffiti artist, which of course was not true. I mean, I did point out that he came from a middle class background. His parents were thoroughly middle class people. He went to university, as far as I know. He went to a private school, I think, and of course he certainly knew what he was doing. He was you know, heavily involved in the art world. He understood the kind of art historical currents that he was, you know, that he wanted to be a part of, and so he was certainly mythologized as the kind of what's that Rousseau concept, the noble savage. You know, there was a bit of that, but it was not the same. It was not the kind of political, you know, the sort of political affirmative action that we would get today.
Can I just say I just love I just love the reaction that I imagine this will get. Here is Basquiat's rendition of a hostile critic. I just love the idea, because that really does look like a child has drawn it to me. So
hang on,
there we go.
I'm trying to look. It's very small. Okay. Yes. So Basquiat was associated with a movement of young artists in the 1980s. A sort of basically return to figuration. So there was a very big movement in the 70s towards non-objective art, towards conceptual art, towards minimalism. This, you know, the idea that you would paint or draw pictures of kind of recognizable figures, that you would paint figures at all, was kind of passé in the New York art world. And so in the 1980s, there was this big resurgence of all these artists, lots of Italians like Enzo Cucchi and Francesco Clemente, and you know, there was Julian Schnabel and Basquiat and Kenny Scharf and Keith Haring, all of these artists that had a kind of, you know, a slightly kind of rough bête noir edge, but also who were very interested in producing pictures of things and people and humans and emotions and ideas and you know, things that of course were sort of drained out of the art world in the 70s, where, as I said, minimalism and conceptualism was king. So, you know, it was a sort of return to tradition in a strange way. But, you know, Basquiat was also associated with... What?
Give people an idea here. $37 million for this. That's
Oh yeah, that's a very well.
Yeah, that's one of his famous ones.
That's a very well known one. Yes, so Basquiat's prices were very high, even during his life, but of course are now absolutely astronomical and insane. I quite like some of Basquiat's work. It just depends upon the period of work. I mean, it's very easy to sort of turn to these images and say, "Oh, look at this crap. My kid could do this." I'm not interested in that sort of conversation, so I'm not going to go on. And people can bitch and moan in the chat all you want, but you do have to contend with this.
Come on, what is this? Come on.
I'm not going to enter into you. I'm not going to play this game. This is not a game that I'm interested in. So,
I mean,
as I said,
when I do a son, it looks a bit like that.
As I said, you have to contend with this work, whether you like it or not. It entered the cultural and artistic lexicon. It is a part of art history. It had an extraordinary influence on things to come, and it was related to certain movements. As I said, almost a kind of return to tradition, a return to this idea of art as being related to figuration and conveying sort of ideas and situations and places, which is something that had been removed from it in the 1970s. So whatever you think of it, and again, it may not be your thing. I don't care. I don't care what people like and don't like. What you like and don't like doesn't matter. It's like saying, I like peas. I don't like peas. Well, fine. That doesn't tell me anything about peas. It doesn't tell me anything about you. It just tells me that you like them and don't like them. Liking and not liking art is not the kind of discussion that I'm interested in having. And it's certainly not the kind of discussion I'm going to have when I talk about art on these streams. So anyway, I want to focus on.
His son looks like a son I did. I'm just saying.
I want to focus on Basquiat's relationship to Warhol. So we're going to avoid talking about his work
All right.
On its own. But yes, Basquiat had an extraordinarily large body of work, some of which was quite successful and some of which was less so. But obviously, there was a neo-primitivism that was a part of the work. It was again deliberately and self-consciously done in a kind of raw, almost pseudo-Africanized style. And Basquiat knew exactly what he was doing. As I said, he was portrayed as a kind of noble savage, as a kind of bête noire, as this black kid of the streets who did these drawings, totally from his own imagination. But he was very clear and understood very well what he was doing.
Could you see it, D, as a kind of precursor to the global homo art style? Because I do see some similarities in the deliberate naivism.
No, I don't. I don't at all. I mean, yes, of course, that's slightly naive style, but you can find that in many different artists and many different periods. So no, I mean, obviously, Basquiat's work is far too confrontational to be part of the global homo art style. Anyway,
okay.
So Basquiat, the reason you know him, and we'll talk about now, is that Julian Schnabel, another one of these artists who became associated with this movement in the 1980s in New York, made a film.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to sneeze there. Made a film in the 1990s. I think it was 1996, which was basically a sort of biography, a biopic of Basquiat and his career. And famously, of course, Warhol was a big part of Basquiat's career and life. And in that film, Warhol was played by none other than David Bowie.
Indeed, and that's why I've seen this film, and that's why I know about this.
Yeah, it's not a great film. There's lots of problems with that film. Obviously, Julian Schnabel he's not a film director. I think it was his first film. So that I have issues with it, but it's certainly interesting in certain ways. I mean, Dennis Hopper plays Bruno Bischoff-Berger. I can't remember the chap who plays Basquiat, but he does quite a good job, I think. Bowie as Warhol is very interesting. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
A fun fact about that film is that the wig and the jacket that Bowie is wearing in the film are actually one of Warhol's wigs and Warhol's jacket, which he borrowed from the Andy Warhol Museum. I don't understand. It's actually quite astonishing to me that they let him use them in the film. But Bowie is literally wearing one of Andy's wigs in that movie. So
I think Gary Oldman's in it. Christopher Walken crops up at one point.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of star-studded cameos in that film.
Willem Dafoe, isn't it?
Willem Dafoe.
Courtney Love, isn't it?
Oh, is she? Oh.
Yeah, she plays Big Pink. So
Big
there we
Pink.
go.
Okay, there you go.
There we are. Yeah.
So anyway, Basquiat became, as I said, he became personal friends with Warhol. He also looked up to Warhol. I mean, obviously Warhol was a great influence on him. Certainly his idea of what it meant to be a celebrity in the New York art world, and so he certainly looked up to that, and basically sought out Warhol to kind of get in with him, so that the association could be sort of beneficial to Basquiat. But unknown to Basquiat, I think, is that his association with Warhol was actually extraordinarily beneficial and changed Warhol's, both his work, certainly his work in this period, a great deal. I mean, Basquiat Warhol was an influence to Basquiat, but Basquiat was also a great influence to Warhol and almost revitalized him. As I said, Warhol's career in terms of his critical response was at a fairly low ebb in the early 1980s. And Warhol had become slightly jaded and disillusioned by the fact that he basically had just was constantly sort of derided for sort of doing bad work at this period. And Basquiat and his association with Warhol basically sort of gave Warhol a renewed desire to kind of change up and to sort of change his relationship to his own work. And also they competed against each other. I mean, obviously Basquiat was a young artist, just sort of starting his career at that point. So they were on a very different level, but I think it was a relationship of both kind of admiration and also the idea that they would compete, that they had to sort of outdo each other. And again, I think that was an extraordinarily positive thing for both of their work, as we'll see. This painting is quite interesting, actually. It's from 1983, I believe, Warhol's portrait of Basquiat. But unlike all of Warhol's other portraits, it's actually painted on one of the oxidation pictures. And there's quite an ambiguous idea there, that you basically paint a portrait of your friend on a painting in which you've pissed.
Yeah,
there's something slightly odd about that. Yeah,
especially given that this artist, let's just say his work was all about institutionalized forms of racism and how the black man's been downtrodden by the white man, and he's literally just pissed on his face.
Yeah, I mean, Warhol's basically pissed on his face. Yeah, very curious, very, very curious.
Which is kind of interesting. I wonder what you thought of that at the time. Anyway, Monday, October the 4th, 1982. Down to meet the Bruno Bischoff-Berger cab, 750. He brought Jean-Michel Basquiat with him. He's the kid who used the name Samo when he used to sit on the sidewalk in Greenwich Village and paint T-shirts. And I'd give him $10 here and there and send him up to Serendipity to try to sell the T-shirts there. He was just one of those kids who drove me crazy. He's black, but some people say he's Puerto Rican, so I don't know. And then Bruno discovered him, and now he's on Easy Street. But he's got a great loft on Christie Street. He was a middle-class Brooklyn kid. I mean, he went to college and things, and he was trying to be like that, painting in the Greenwich Village. And so I had lunch for them, and then I took a Polaroid, and he went home within 2 hours. A painting was back, still wet, of him and me together. And I mean, just getting to Christie Street must have taken an hour. He told me his assistant painted it. So there we go.
So if you go to the next image, that's the Polaroid that Warhol's talking about that he took of both of them. And if you go to the next image, that's the painting that Basquiat sent back up to Warhol, based on the Polaroid.
I see. Fucking hell. I'm sorry, dear. I got nothing to say. I got nothing good to say about this artist. But anyway, let's carry on.
Okay, you want to go to the next slide?
Wednesday, May the 18th, 1983. Oh, and Paige is upset. Jean-Michel Basquiat is really on heroin. And she was crying, telling me to do something. But what can you do? He got a hole in his nose, and he couldn't do coke anymore. And he wanted to still be on something. I guess he wants to be the youngest artist to go. Paige gave him a big art show uptown last month, and she's the reason he's been around the office. They're involved.
Yeah, so Paige, this is Paige Powell, who was someone who worked for Warhol at the time and was sort of a big part in Warhol's life, certainly his professional and social life a bit. She comes up a lot in the diary. But yeah, she was involved, and I think was one of the early promoters of Jean-Michel Basquiat. And really kind of, I think, was partially the person responsible for getting him an entree to the people who become his big art dealers at the time. This is a very interesting diary entry because, of course, Warhol says he wants to be the youngest artist to go. And of course, in 1989, he did become a very young artist to go. He overdosed and died. He died of a heroin overdose. So
actually, it was even though it says 1988, August the 12th, 1988, heroin overdose.
88. Yeah, 88.
27 years old.
27 years old. He's a member of the 27 Club. There's that idea that Janis Joplin and Kurt Cobain and all those people died when they were 27. So unfortunately, Basquiat, I mean, I think he's a very interesting figure, but also quite tragic because he almost immediately burned himself out. Both burned himself out on fame, burned himself out artistically, and eventually burned himself out on drugs. He almost immediately became kind of rudderless. Also, I think the loss of Warhol as a figure in his life had some effect on him. I think losing his mentor in a way, because Warhol died the year before Basquiat died, I think was very hard on him. And of course, Basquiat's career is now being, almost completely posthumous. And the things that have transpired and his prices and his fame, they're all tied to him as the tragic artist who died. He became one of those figures, and so it is strangely prescient that Warhol kind of saw this, predicted this.
It's impossible for me not to see this guy's entire career, fame, and tragic death as an indictment on liberal New York, white liberal New York culture, essentially.
Well, I mean, I think there is a degree of that. I don't think he's without merit, and as I said, I certainly don't wholly condemn his work, but I do think that it is quite a cautionary tale. I mean, so his first gallery, Anina Nozai Gallery, she gave him a space in the basement of the gallery in which to paint. And so he was literally like living in the basement painting, and she would bring collectors down to the basement to watch him as if he was a sort of animal in a cage at the zoo. I mean, he was, he was exploited heavily And as I said, there was a mythos that was immediately created around him. I mean, he knew it, and he knew what they were doing, and he let it happen. He understood that it was his ticket to fame, and so he paid a very heavy price for it, I think.
I just think I honestly just think there's something very distasteful about, like, how can I say, let's elevate the black artist who tells us how racist we all are. Ha ha ha! You know, eating nibbles and drinking wine. You know, meanwhile, obviously being young. I mean, you see it many times, but I don't know. There's just something about it that I find like almost like repulsive reflection of that particular scene.
But yes, and I think that's certainly true. But I think that it's also undeniable that he, you know, that he had his own internal logic. I mean, I don't think that he was without merit as an artist. I mean, that's my sort of assessment of him. You know, that he was used and abused, and a lot of it was, of course, mythos, and that there was something very dark about the whole project. But I also think that within that, he had the spark of real talent, which was almost entirely wasted.
There's something about I tell you who else is kind of a little bit like this as well, is the entire career of Spike Lee. I see as being a bit like this, where there's a particular how can I say, like, there's something about that New York scene that loves to elevate the idea of these characters. And I don't remember the name of that Spike Lee film is it Do the Right Thing? Do the Right Thing.
Yeah.
And it's there's something about that milieu, and both Basquiat and early Spike Lee remind me of that kind of that idea of the I don't know what they were trying to do there in the 80s, but I don't like it. It smells wrong to me. So
I think it was in a lot of respects wrong-headed, and certainly was a quite deliberate strategy on the part of the people pushing it, which is of course is a separate thing from what Basquiat or any of these people were.
Yeah, you know, it's also not to say that Spike Lee is a bad director either.
Exactly. I mean, you know, but I think both of them certainly made that pact. They made that deal with Mephistopheles, and they should have understood what they were doing. They did understand what they were doing, and they did it anyway. You know, it didn't destroy Spike Lee the way it destroyed Jean-Michel, but
well, you could say that, but look at what he's reduced to doing now.
I don't even know what he's doing now.
One of his last films was called Black KKK Klansman.
Oh, dear, oh dear. So anyway, but as I said, Warhol and Basquiat had a very interesting relationship, and I would say a mutualistic one. I mean, there was always an idea with Warhol's kind of the people he championed in the 60s.
He won an Oscar for it as well. Sorry, the Black KKK Klansman also won an Oscar. So anyway, carry on.
There was an idea that Warhol was a kind of exploiter, that he would take someone like Edie Sedgwick and wring her out and then leave her to die. But I don't think that accusation can be made with his relationship with Basquiat. I mean, as I said, it was very much a mutualistic relationship. They both, I think, benefited from that relationship, and it helped both of them in different ways. And you know, Basquiat was as much a kind of, I mean, if anything, it was just the idea that Warhol was finally around a young artist. You know, I mean, in the 1970s and the early 1980s, Warhol was almost exclusively around socialites, business people. You know, that this is when Andy Warhol Enterprises became a serious business concern. And so everything was sort of related to doing these society portraits, to doing these portfolios, to doing, this and that and this and that, and Warhol was basically very much isolated from artists, the art world, sort of people who actually care about and people who are passionate about making artwork. And so I think Basquiat was a kind of way of reconnecting with this idea of someone who was actually an artist, thinking about art as a passion again, which I think had somewhat drained away. I think Warhol had been very jaded at this point, and I think it was a revitalization in a way. And as you get older, everyone I think will realize this. I mean, there is something quite inspirational about being around energetic young people, full of ideas, full of vigor, full of enthusiasm. I mean, you probably certainly know what I'm talking about with all the people, the people we associate with. With
unfortunately, I've yet to reach that age. I still only have utter contempt for young people. Apart from Turner.
Well, you say that, but I'm talking about. Think about the people in our circles. Charlemagne and Columba and Prudentialist, and all these content creators and Turnip. I mean, there's something. It's inspiring being around young people who aren't thoroughly sort of dead inside.
No, they have appalling pop culture knowledge, and for that I can't forgive them.
All right. Well, when you get as old as me, you'll know what I'm talking about.
I love you, Charlie. Don't worry.
Yes, Lander.
But still,
yes,
you're a Philistine.
Lander, you are a very energetic young man. So, anyway, next slide, please.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
This is Andy and Jean-Michel.
Was he gay? Is he? No, because he had that relationship with the young girl.
No, he was very much not. And Warhol was at some point. I think he had an argument with Paige Powell, the woman who was mentioned in that last entry, and she sort of angrily said, "Oh, well, you're starting your disgusting gay affair with Jean-Michel again." I think people would throw that in Warhol's face and sort of accuse him of having prurient interest. But I will say that Warhol was not interested in men of color. So,
well, I mean, I hate to say this, but statistically, I think Basquiat was the more likely to have AIDS, even in 1980s New York. That's one of those little known things that going through Ashes, I dredged up that the black community had a bigger AIDS epidemic than the gay community.
Certainly did.
Yeah.
And of course, the black gay community in America was the worst of all. And still is. I think it's still the vector of the most kind of infection, transmissions of HIV is in that community. So,
yeah. I mean, to the extent where I know, like, having listened to lots of rap, in rap circles or among like the kind of black intellectual leadership, they're convinced that AIDS was kind of was a kind of fake, like a fake thing, that it was kind of launched by the CIA to like hurt black people, basically.
Yes, that's a common idea. Well, there's also in the kind of gay sort of AIDS activist circles in the 80s, this idea that it was engineered by Ronald Reagan to destroy homosexuals.
Yeah. So there's a weird crossover though, because through E. Michael Jones, I also discovered that there's a kind of reactionary Catholic AIDS isn't real angle as well.
Yes.
Where E. Michael Jones is convinced that a little bit like the way people talk about the Coof now.
Yeah.
It was basically trial run in the 80s with AIDS. That it wasn't like really an epidemic and all that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Yes.
I don't want to,
Also, this is just a bit of left field. I see Joe says Warhol had crabs. That sounds like a joke, but he actually did. There's an incident in the 70s in the diary where when Warhol goes to where did he go? Did he go to Iran? Warhol did go to Iran in the 70s, but I think that this trip he may have gone elsewhere. He went to Kuwait and somewhere else. But yes, in the diary, he mentions during that trip finding crabs and trying to find a soap to kill them. So Joe isn't making that up.
I hope that's not a real. I hope that's not a real tiger print, by the way. I hope that's.
I'm afraid that's a real tiger skin. I mean, it's probably it's an old one, of course.
Boom.
But yes,
after his conservation piece,
it's an old one. It's an old one.
I disavow.
Next,
Wednesday, October 31st, 1984. People discovering AA, the organic chicken buyer, animal welfare conservationist. I've actually always had these views. Bruno just called at the Christie's auction. Jean-Michel's painting went for $20,000. I think he's going to be the big black painter. He's so open. It was one of his sort of big paintings. I think Jean-Michel's early stuff is sort of better, but then he was just painting, and now he has to think about stuff to paint to sell. And how many screaming Negroes can you do? Well, I guess you can do them forever, but Andy bought a $700 mask for Halloween yesterday. Mexican. He just spends money. He did give up the room at the Ritz-Carlton, and he doesn't take limos now, so that's an improvement. But what should he do? And I've told him this, is keep his early paintings and store them so that he'll have them all to sell later on. Because Bruno just buys up everything and sells them off slowly. But Jean-Michel really should be keeping them for a nest egg. Very clever. The paintings that get good prices are Rosenberg's early pieces and anything by Jasper and Cy Twombly. You mentioned him on you mentioned him the other day, didn't you? Wesselman's sort of selling off. Rosenquist's prices are just medium, but I think he's the best. I really do.
Yeah, so these would have been artists of Warhol's generation. Yeah.
If you were Basquiat, this is a good mentor to have, financially speaking. Like it's like if he had a head on him, he could have taken some great advice there. And as we can see the prices of his paintings now, it would have made him a multi-millionaire.
Oh, he would have been, if he had lived and he had followed this advice. But the problem is he didn't. He burned, and you see it in this entry. Basquiat just burned through money in, of course, the stupid way that people who come into money suddenly.
Yeah, you see it with Premiership footballers who are on like $100,000 a week, and they still manage to like burn through it.
Yeah.
High time preference.
And he sold everything, so he did not follow this advice. And Warhol is absolutely correct here. Warhol took his own advice. Not as much as he probably would have wanted. I think he didn't keep some of the early work like the soup cans and the Marylands, but he did keep some of his pieces from his earlier work and did periodically sell them off later on at a huge profit. So that is a very sound strategy. Jasper Johns, who's mentioned here, Jasper Johns is, I think, the sort of the best example of this. Jasper owns like half of his most famous work. I mean, he's never sold it, and of course now it's extraordinarily valuable. So yes, it is a very good business strategy. But when someone is handing you wads of cash and you're a young artist, you're not going to think about that. You're going to say, I can make another one. The thing is, you can't. You're never going to be able to recreate that early work. I mean, that happens to every single artist. You have this enormous burst of creativity early in your career, and then it will even out. And sometimes you can't ever recover that period again. So you want to keep
saying if he'd live, it's unlikely they'd be worth that much. I think you're wrong there.
I think you're wrong. I think that by this point, given the world we live in, they wouldn't be worth quite as much as they are. You're right. but he would be extraordinarily wealthy, and his prices would be quite high. Yes, but obviously,
I dread to think of what would have become of Basquiat if he was alive today. Okay, here they are working together.
So this image is, of course, very important for a number of reasons. One is that they decided to collaborate on a body of work in the 1980s. They actually started out doing a collaboration with Francesco Clemente, who was another artist, well-known artist of that period. But they ended up doing most of the collaboration with just Warhol and Basquiat. And they produced these sort of paintings, which people at the time absolutely hated. This body of work was absolutely derided and despised. In retrospect, I think it's a very, very interesting body of work for a number of reasons. One is that the paintings ended up being almost a kind of an art battle between the two of them. And so they would both paint on the things. Sometimes they would paint at the same time. Sometimes Warhol would do some painting on it, and then Basquiat would come over and then do some work on them. And they would paint each other out. So Warhol would paint something, and then Basquiat would paint over it or deface it, and then Warhol would paint over something that Basquiat did. So these paintings almost became this kind of conversation on the canvas between the two of them. And I can't think of any other artists who ever did something like that. It was a very unique idea. Was it
Andy Warhol feat Basquiat, or Basquiat feat Andy Warhol?
it was Andy Warhol feat Basquiat. The other thing, of course, that's very interesting and very telling about this photograph is, what do you see Andy Warhol doing there? He's painting.
Yeah.
He's standing in front of a canvas with a brush, and he's painting, which is something that he hadn't done really for probably 20 years before this. And this is what I was saying when I said that Basquiat was a great influence and on Warhol, is that Basquiat single-handedly inspired Warhol to actually start painting again. I mean, painting by hand, as I said, which is something that Warhol had almost completely abandoned, other than painting backgrounds and for the portraits and painting the shadows with a mop and doing that sort of thing. But Warhol actually started painting by hand again, and it sounds funny to celebrate that, but it was a huge sort of reversal. Warhol suddenly putting brush to canvas, and it was all the association with Basquiat that did it, and it was, motivated by sort of being inspired by the energy of a young artist, but also in a sense of competition. Warhol, as I said, was at that low ebb, and it was also a way for Warhol to say, look, I'm the master, I'm the mentor in the relationship, and I need to assert myself. I need to make work that's going to make people take notice again. So we'll look at a few of these collaborations, and there's Basquiat working on one of the pictures,
doing some weights. Lift.
Yeah. So the other thing about Warhol is that he was actually interested in fitness, especially heavily in the 1980s, and so the diary is full of anecdotes about him going to a personal trainer, doing weight training, doing exercises and such. So very interesting, actually, that Warhol was bodybuilding pilled, and try to get other people interested in it as well. He had his own weights and weight bench right in his studio, which is very funny. So.
He's very skinny, isn't he? Warhol.
Yes, Warhol was skeletal. I think at one point in the diary he talks about being 119 pounds, which he was 5'11", I think, 5'10". Yeah. That's that's almost dangerously thin. So
yeah, this is a 8 stone 5 pounds for British people. Oof. We don't care about kilos. Okay, so let's. Wednesday, December the 19th, 1984. Fred came from Europe. Bruno wanted 28 pictures in his 4-year contract. but I decided he could only have 25. And then I gave him one for himself. So that's 26. This is for Jean-Michel. My things. But I don't get it. These are huge paintings he's getting for peanuts. And it's funny because only my disaster paintings are the in paintings. Even the Campbell soup cans are out. And I really have only 2 collections. Saatchi and Newhouse a little bit. Whereas Roy Lichtenstein and those people have 15 or 20. I guess I'm just not a good painter. What's his 2 collections? The
Saatchi and Newhouse. I mean, he's not.
2 collectors. Yeah,
2 collectors. Yeah,
yeah,
he's not. It's not entirely true because he's also very heavily collected by Peter Brandt and by the Menel. The Menel family from Houston, who still both of whom still hold. I mean, the Peter Brandt collection of Warhols is absolutely massive, and the Menel collection has a huge number of Warhol pieces. So he had a few more, but he's right about that. Where you get an artist like Roy Lichtenstein, some of these others, and they had lots of collectors. So, and of course you see that element of self-doubt that crops up quite frequently in the diary.
Do you think that I mean, we haven't done the Roy Lichtenstein 7-part series, but did he endlessly do greatest hits like Warhol had done? I mean, maybe
yes,
maybe
every artist does that. I mean, every artist with this type of career will eventually do that. I mean, even Picasso did it to some degree. You know, you're always going to return to yourself as a subject in some way or the other. I mean, it's only natural because, of course, it's you. You have limited, you have a limited sort of idea, a limited number of ideas that you want to express. And yes, you're always going to have to deal with your own work. And Jasper Johns, Reichenberg, Warhol, any of these artists, the Wyeths.
I was just wondering why Lichtenstein was in, but Warhol was out, or is he being too in 1984?
No, yeah, he's perfectly right about that. It just depends. It's like fashion. It's really it's a completely irrational market, and there's no particular reason that one would be in and one would be out. At one time or another. I don't know. I mean, why did Warhol's career have this meteoric rise in the mid 2000s? Why is Basquiat suddenly, his prices are double, triple, quadruple? Why do some artists fall out of favor? It's irrational. It doesn't, So we're going to look at some of the collaborations, the paintings that Warhol and Basquiat did. Many of his subjects on these paintings are corporate logos. Mm-hmm. So of course, there's a strange dichotomy where Warhol had returned to painting by hand, but the subject he chose was basically the repetition of these kind of corporate insignia. But it's a very interesting interplay between that type of image and the sort of raw kind of quasi-primitivistic way that Jean-Michel dealt with images. I think as you look at these pictures, you may have a slightly more positive assessment of Jean-Michel's abilities. He certainly had an understanding of kind of how to deal with compositions and how to deal with kind of sort of color harmonies and contrasts and things. I mean, what you may personally think of the kind of style is immaterial, but it is. He obviously had a quite a sophisticated understanding of the interplay between his work and Warhol's work in these pictures.
Well, he looks like he's graffiti. This literally looks like he's graffitied a Warhol.
Graffiti to Warhol, yes. Which is what I said. I mean, part of what makes these pictures so interesting is that they're basically a series of defacements. So, go on.
Yeah.
The other thing to know about these pictures is it's always difficult to tell when looking at reproductions, but most of these paintings, you can step forward if you want, whenever you want. Most of these paintings are absolutely enormous, huge paintings, 8 foot tall, 10 foot tall, 20 foot long. Not all of them, but many of them are quite large. I mean, you saw that painting that they were working on together. That was a quite large picture, but some of these are absolutely enormous.
What are those little kind of long-nosed faces in top hats?
Little Basquiat characters. I mean, he drew little characters all the time, so difficult to say. I don't know the particular iconography there. So
it's like a little voodoo man.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, kind of interesting. This because these are definitely like voodoo-ish characters, aren't they?
Oh yes, and these are, so when Warhol talked about the screaming Negroes, that's what he was referring to. This sort of figure was very much associated with Basquiat's early paintings, and remain the kind of most valuable pictures that he did.
I see.
But there is a kind of atavistic, yes, what I call kind of quasi-Africanized figures.
Who's this kind of countrified kind of ranch figure on the left here in the hat?
No idea. Don't know. I don't know the specific source of his iconographies. So
interesting. I mean, I could make readings of these, but they'd be all far too politically incorrect for Susan. Because there's a reading I want to make of this, D, which you can probably read between the lines. But
do it.
I mean, what we're looking at here is basically the impossibility of the American delusion. The idea of the melting pot. You can't make it work. You just can't make it work because you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
They're kind of cool. I quite like this series,
Yeah, I really like these. I really like these paintings.
All right, you've kind of won me round a bit on Basquiat.
Yeah, I told you. I
quite like the series.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're visually quite complex and interesting. And as I said, they knew it. They both knew what they were doing. Obviously,
except America haunted by ghosts of Africa.
Yeah.
As it will always be until you sort yourselves out, you stupid new world. Anyway,
the landscape of empty corporate logos and the animus spirit of the
but it's interesting though, because this looks like the imposition of the African on the corporate hellscape, but in reality, of course, the corporate hellscape is the imposition on all of us.
Yes, on all of us. On everyone.
Yes. Okay.
So that's a silhouette of Ronald Reagan, by the way.
Why has he just written thin lips?
I don't know. Ronald Reagan did have very thin lips, so.
Yes. There we go. Very, very, very Thomas Sowell to point out the actual tax receipts of the Reagan administration.
Yes.
And now the same thing, but with African stylings on top.
Crocodile there, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I love the huge, jarring, contrasting red and green win $1 million because of course that's what Jean-Michel did. I mean, he won the lottery and then pissed it all away. There's something very dark about that chance.
You see, the thing is that what I find interesting about this is that the American idea is that the African American is going to find a voice within like the kind of parameters of the kind of corporate space that they're given. In a way, the corporate platform for the African American to make something within that. But it's almost impossible to see what Basquiat's doing here as not being an invasion or at odds with the backdrop in a way. And then, of course, it's still sold for £3 million or whatever. So
yeah.
Well,
as I said, people hated these paintings at the time. They were a complete disaster, and many of them ended up not being sold. I think Bruno Bischofberger has still has a lot of them and has strategically sold them off. Of course, now there's been a reassessment and people are quite interested in these pictures, but it was a very slow burn. They were not successful, And as Warhol said, I mean, these pictures were enormous. Some of these pictures were, 10, 15 feet long, 8 foot high, and Bischofberger was buying them for 20K, which is very low in the 80s, even in the 80s. So,
I tell you what we're looking at really is Jihad versus McWorld. This is the whole thing.
There it is.
Jihad versus McWorld.
Yeah.
And there we have Jihad versus McWorld even more. He's literally punching him in the face. Okay.
Yeah. So of course these were shown at Tony Schifrazi Gallery in New York. They were shown in Europe with Bruno Bischofberger, but they were shown at Tony Schifrazi. And so as part of for the poster for this exhibition, they did these boxing photographs. As you go to the next one, you'll see another one.
Oh yeah.
And if you go to the next one, you can see the actual poster for the exhibition.
Amazing.
Yeah,
really
it's
good.
Wonderful. Yeah, really good. And I like, of course, that it does emphasize the idea that these paintings were a kind of battle between the two of them.
Yes, very good. Yeah.
So
in fact, it's not a feat in the kind of hip hop parlance. It's verses. It's Andy Warhol versus. Like Run DMV versus Aerosmith.
Yes. Yeah. Very good. Very good.
Tuesday, October the 9th, 1984. I made up some things for Sean Lennon's birthday, and the painting was still wet. Incidentally, I would check out what was that one that they did on DMC? It's Like That. Didn't they do an Elvis one? I want to say there was an Run DMC versus Elvis at one point. That was kind of interesting.
No, I didn't.
Anyway, I made up some things for Sean Lennon's birthday, and the painting was still wet. A little incidentally, if you know anything about rap, Run DMC did a very different style of rap to the kind of rap that I champion from the 90s. They're much more it's just a different style, Peter Pepper. It's more that kind of style. Anyway, I made up some things for Sean Lennon's birthday, and the painting was still wet. Sorry to keep on going back to Run DMC, but sorry, but at WrestleMania 5, I think it is, or it could be WrestleMania 6. I think it's WrestleMania 5. Run DMC come out at WrestleMania, and they do the WrestleMania rap. Okay. It is the worst thing ever because they don't actually rap. They literally just come out and hype the crowd and go WrestleMania. Oh, it's awful. It's one of the worst things you'll ever see. Anyway, I made up some things for Sean Lennon's birthday, and the painting was still wet. A little heart candy box and said, "I love you." And I also bought a paintbrush that instead of bristles had strips of red colored paper in a stack and a bracelet I'd made out of pennies. PH picked me up and we went to Dakota cab 650, and there were fans outside in honor of the day still on the visual because the 9th is Sean and John's birthday.
Yeah, so for years, like John Lennon fans held a vigil every year around the date he was shot, which I think was December 8th, 1980. at the Dakota was where John and Yoko lived. So.
Inside Yoko's door, everybody had taken their shoes off, so there was a line of shoes. I wouldn't take mine off, though, and I didn't want PH to enter either, and I wouldn't be alone. PH said that when she went to the Royal Palace once in Hawaii, that the tour guides gave you booties to put over your shoes, and that would be a better way to keep the house clean, I think. So when we heard a glass drop and break, that was our excuse, that we didn't want to be in our socks because there might be a glass. Yoko ran to Sean and he came in and said, "Did you bring my dollar?" Yoko said that he'd been remembering and wanting the other half of the dollar I tore in half the last time. So I gave him a whole bunch of torn bills that I'd brought for him, and he went off to try to find the match to the half he had. Keith was there, and he brought Kenny Scharf as his date. Walter Cronkite was there. What the fuck? Walter Cronkite was there.
Yeah, it's Sean Lennon birthday party, yes.
And John Cage and Louise Nevelson and Lisa Robinson. On purpose for fun, I spelt Sean's name Sean on a couple of his gifts. So when Sean autographed napkins for me, he signed it that way too. He was wearing Michael Jackson type gloves. Would have been very trendy in 1984, of course. But on both hands, and his friend, little Max Leroy, Waller Renoy's son, had given him. Michael Jackson is his favorite singer. He said he likes Prince too, but he must like Boy George too, because later on his computer he had a drawing of Boy George. Sean and Keith hit it off. I'm surprised Sean's favorite singer wasn't John Lennon, but anyway. Keith is very good playing with his kids. He was playing really well with another baby that was there too, coming after her with a stuffed animal. Sean sat between me and Roberta Flack. Roberta Flack was there as well.
Yeah. Well, it goes on, part 2.
The cake was a big blonde grand piano. Sean was one who had the idea that it was a good piano. He has a piano in his bedroom. He cut the cake. Harry Nilsson led everybody singing Harry Nilsson was there. He was famously very reclusive.
Yeah. Well, he and John Lennon were like best friends. So
Harry Nilsson, I think, has been on AA radio at least 3 times.
Wow.
Anyway, Nelson led everybody singing for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow," and later Sean made a really nice speech and said that if his father were there, he'd be singing for "They're a Jolly Good Fellow." After dinner, Yoko and Sean and some of the people went over to W New Broadcast, and they were originally going to do Inside the Building, but at the last minute, the Dakota wouldn't let them. But most of the people stayed behind. We went into Sean's bedroom, and there was a kid there setting up the Apple computer that Sean had gotten as a present. 1984, an Apple computer, the Macintosh model. I said that once some man had been calling me a lot, wanting to give me a job, but I'd never called him back or something. And then the kid looked up and said, "Yeah, that was me. I'm Steve Jobs." Fucking hell, yes. People at this party.
So Steve Jobs is setting up Sean Lennon's Macintosh for him.
Remarkable group of individuals here. And he looked so young, like a college guy. And then he told me that he would send me one now. And he gave me a lesson on drawing with it. It only comes in black and white now, but they'll make it soon in color. And then Keith and Kenny used it. Keith had already used it once to make a t-shirt, but Kenny was using it for the first time. And I felt so old and so out of it with this young whiz guy right there who'd helped invent it. Sean's bedroom had 2 mattresses on the floor and lots of Beatles pictures and the big Rupert Smith picture of Yoko on the wall. There was wrapping paper and presents all over the floor and lots of robot toys on the shelves. After we left, I was so blue because before I was Sean's best grown-up friend. Now I think Keith is. And they really hit it off. He invited Keith to his party for kids the next day, and I don't think I was invited, and I'm hurt.
Amazing. So, I love it. Yeah, and so there's Steve Jobs and Sean Lennon from that party setting up the computer.
Do you think Sean Lennon is the most spoiled kid of all time? I mean,
he may be the most spoiled child of all time. Yes,
that's fucking ridiculous. That party.
Yeah.
So there we go.
So So around 1983-84, Warhol, his lease had run out on 860 Broadway, which is where his studio / business was, and so he spent a year basically looking at buildings in New York for where to move, because he wanted to buy a building rather than to rent, as he'd done for all his studios previously. So he ended up buying this building on 33rd Street in I think Madison Avenue, I think, as his new headquarters. And they basically moved from 860 Broadway to this new building. And so this building, I think it was, I can't remember how much he paid for it. Something which now would be absurdly low. It was like $3 million or something. And I think they spent another $1 million renovating it. But this building is absolutely palatial compared to the places Warhol's studio had been in the past. So I've just included some quite rare photographs of the new digs.
Yeah, very high ceilings. Bloody hell.
There's
Yeah.
Warhol at the reception desk. So also this building was not just Warhol's studio, but it was the offices of Interview magazine, Warhol's magazine. So this picture is the Interview offices.
Yeah, this is also the interior. I've talked about this before, haven't I? The bar and restaurant aesthetic that was exported to the rest of the world. They love those big pipes.
Yeah. There's Andy in the basement. So the basement was originally going to be Andy's studio, but he then decided, why, this is my building. Why should I be stuck in the windowless basement? So he ended up taking a different room for his personal studio. This is his business manager Fred Hughes' office. It's a hell of an office, Also,
Still
considering that
I disavow the tiger stinging.
There's a tiger there, yeah, and the bust of Leonardo da Vinci. Also, of course, one of those Silver Liz paintings was sold, I don't know, about 6 years ago for something like $60 million. So,
how much do the Interview magazines go for? I bet they're collectible these days as well. So they all look quite cool.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, certainly back issues of them, depending on from when they're from, are quite collectible. They're large. It's very, you can sort of see in that it's physically a very large. It was a very large magazine. So this is also Fred Hughes' office. You can see these what are now absurdly valuable pictures, just draped all over the office.
I thought I'd trail this, given that we're reaching the 3-hour mark. There is going to be a part 8, isn't there? Let's face it. Because I'm just looking at this folder. It goes on. There's 245 images in this folder.
All right.
But I just know the return of who is imminent. So let's have a look.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is Bridget Berlin, who mentioned a number of times. Became sort of Warhol's oldest friend. Was a friend and worker. I mean, she worked as a receptionist at Warhol's offices for but basically his entire life. She only died a few years ago. She probably has the distinction of living amongst the longest of all the OG Warhol people. So. And those are her pugs. She lost a huge amount of weight. So she was the fat woman who was poking herself with amphetamines. Yes. Yeah. So she lost a huge amount of weight. I mean, you have to remember, of course, that by the 1980s, her parents had died, and so she came into her inheritance. Her father was the president of the Hearst Corporation, William Randolph Hearst's company. So her family was quite wealthy, and by this point she'd actually become an heiress. So she lost a lot of weight and shaped up, and became a kind of rich dowager. Those are her pugs, Fame and Fortune, by the way.
Yeah.
This is Vincent Fremont, who I think came to Warhol as when he was like 20 in 1970 or something, and ended up working for him for his for Warhol's entire life, as one of his kind of managers and
he's
also
been around, this guy. We've seen him a few times.
This guy's been around, and actually he had a life. His life with Warhol extended well past Warhol's death, so he became the exclusive agent for the Andy Warhol Foundation, or the Andy Warhol estate, basically selling off Warhol's work that was owned by the estate, and made I would probably say one of the biggest commissions. He made something like 20% on every work that he sold, so he's absolutely minted now. But yeah, he's basically a lifetime employee of Warhol, and even Warhol past his death.
Let me. I'll be back in one second. Hold on. Sorry, I'll move on to the next image.
Yeah. Okay. This is the room where they would have lunch. So part of the business was always kind of entertaining clients, whether they be kind of art collectors or whether they be advertisers for Interview magazine, and that would mean where the kind of focus was at this period is basically wining and dining advertisers for the magazine. So this is where Warhol where they had the lunches at the office. Anyone in the chat have any questions or anything to say whilst AA's? Yeah, everyone needs a moose head, Russell Burnham. Also, Warhol had a huge love of fiesta wear. If anyone is familiar with sort of American China from the Art Deco period, I think fiesta wear might still be made in some form, but Warhol collected a huge amount of it. And I think that the dishes at Andy Warhol Enterprises were always fiesta wear from the 30s and 40s. I don't know if the moose had a name. Victor Bockris isn't going to come up. We saw Victor Bockris last week in a video, and obviously I'll eventually mention his biography of Warhol, but I don't have any specific piece about Victor Bockris.
I'm back.
Hello, everything all right?
Yes, all good. Okay, so
all right. I'm just hoping we can at least get to the end of this bit.
Kind of colonial looking stuff here. Yeah.
So Warhol, as I said, was a collector, a hoarder, some might say. So this is just one of the rooms in the new building became, of course, completely packed with Warhol stuff.
It's a huge space, isn't it?
Yeah, you could see how vast some of the parts of this building were. So this is what they called the ballroom, where they were, this was sort of a dual purpose when he would have to do any sort of large work, but it was also where they intended to hold kind of, if they had it sort of big events, they could host them here.
What was it? An old factory or something?
It was it belonged to Consolidated Edison, which is the electricity provider in New York. I don't know if it was some sort of substation or what, but the building was a Con Ed building. And this is again more of Warhol's random objects, and also some print series that we'll see later on in the foreground. I like this picture. This picture is very interesting.
Well, I mean, I can see Quentin Crisp.
Yeah, so this is one of the lunches that they would have at the office. So sometimes they would have lunches for advertisers for interviews. Sometimes they would have lunches for collectors, but also sometimes just lunches for people that, Warhol's friends or people that are visiting and such. So I don't know if you can identify all the people in this picture, but
I mean, there's you as a kind of youth there sitting there somewhere. I recognize this girl here, but I can't remember what her name is.
So that's Bianca Jagger. So that was
that's it, Bianca Jagger. Yes,
it's Mick Jagger's ex-wife, and then next to her is Rupert Everett.
Oh yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
And of course, next to him is Boy George in the sunglasses.
Yeah.
And I identified a young man at the end of the table. I don't know who that is. And then the character next to him is a chap called Marilyn, who had a kind of minor hit in the UK around this time, the 80s.
Yeah. Marilyn, I know about this character. He is an ultimate minion.
Yes,
was he part of Boy George?
Yeah, he's a Boy George minion. He's the mace. He's Boy George's mace.
He's like a kind of Mark figure. I'm joking. Sorry, I can't resist to get
You always have to do it, yeah. And then Andy, obviously, and Keith Haring, who is the Keith that's referred to in the diary all the time, and who was another kind of part of the graffiti artist scene. And people will probably be familiar with Keith Haring's iconography. And I don't know who this woman is on the end of the table, although someone in the chat says Steven Pinker, so I'll go with that.
Do you know what's weird? Marilyn is a spitting image of my old best friend from school.
Uh-oh.
Wow, he really looks like him. Oh, he's a spitting image. Oh, wow. Okay.
They will. Anyway, so that, yeah, I would have gone to that lunch.
Great. What was Quentin Crisp doing there?
I don't know what Quentin Crisp
was that when he was doing that Broadway show?
This is probably, yes, it is probably a period. I mean, Quentin Crisp had moved to New York at this point. So, and this was kind of, he had that big resurgence in the 80s and 90s. So this was certainly at the beginning of that. So
he left that dingy, reclusive flat that he was in for many,
that
many
flat
years.
And it ended up being, kind of New York celebrity. And so last but not least, this is Warhol's private studio. So for the first time, basically since the beginning of Warhol's career, he had a studio, like a proper artist studio of his own, where he went and did work himself, which again sounds sort of funny, but if you think of the 47th Street, the Silver Factory, and all of Warhol's other spaces, they were all kind of communal workspaces. And so when he got the new building, Warhol had his own studio again. So
this is definitely his best pad, in my opinion, so far.
Oh yes, yeah, I love this. I love this building. Sadly, it was after Warhol's death. Of course, it was owned by the foundation for a very long time and sat empty. And then they sort of redeveloped it into kind of you could rent it out for events. And sadly, it was demolished a couple of years ago to build some high-rise monstrosity, because of course it's very, very, very valuable real estate. So,
what a waste of space that after his death there.
Yeah.
There's Warhol.
I put this in. So the next couple of images represent something very 80s, a very 80s trend and a very sort of strange tangent that Warhol went on. But I also like this because I remember there was some furore maybe last year about someone making an invisible sculpture, and I remember people tweeting at me, "Oh, what do you think of this, D?" Of someone has sold an invisible sculpture. And I always laugh because of course people have been making invisible sculptures, like someone does something like this every decade. And so this is, I think, 1985. Warhol was invited to do an art piece at a nightclub called Area. And so Warhol's contribution was to do an invisible sculpture, and which involved Warhol coming and standing there for like a minute and then walking away, and that was the sculpture. So, and if you
Low
go
effort.
to the next, very low effort, very low effort. And if you go to the next slide, you can see. I love this next picture. Like a zoo animal. But
Right.
I also included these pictures because they're amongst the very rare pictures showing Warhol wearing. You see he's wearing something around his neck.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which is a crystal. And so Warhol in the 80s, like so many other people, got involved with various homeopathic, alternate, kind of therapy, energy, doctors / charlatans. And he started to see amongst other people, amongst his regular physician and his massage therapist and his personal trainer and Janet Sarton, who did his facials. He started to see a crystal doctor, and started to get into crystals, which is to me just a very 80s thing.
It's a crystal, nothing more, nothing less.
Thank you, AA.
Right.
So the next couple of diary entries are. There's a lot of entries in the diary about Warhol visiting these various people, and I think they're hilarious. So I put them in there.
We got time. We got time for these this time. Yes. Let's do these, and then we'll have to end it after this. Yeah.
Dear, oh dear.
All right. Friday, April the 19th, 1985. I mean, what else could he possibly do in the next 2 years, D?
Oh, huge things. You have no idea.
All right, April 1985. It was an all-day crystal day. The big cheese, Dr. Reese, was in town. My appointment was for 12 at Bernshon's. He was taking me to lunch with Reese, and we were going to do my cranium. I asked Reese how he started in crystals, and he said that when he was little, Mr. Morning came to see him, and when he was a baby, he saw Mr. Morning, but nobody else did. And then in the army, he got interested in electricity and the body and all this stuff. Reese was talking about his trip where he went around sticking crystals all over the pyramids and the Wailing Wall, and he eats things like coffee and donuts, but he cures the coffee by passing the crystal over it 10 times. And he says he knows somebody in South Africa who went to the Wailing Wall, and now he wants to get his money out of South Africa and do movies. Reese is
Episcopalian.
This is someone who only eats fish, right? So I feel better with him.
No, Episcopalianism is the name for the Anglican Communion outside of England.
Oh, sorry. So, what's the people who only eat fish then? Like binary surfer?
Pescatarians. Very different thing.
Sorry.
That was a very academic agent exchange.
So I feel better with him than I do with the Jewish crystal people. Somehow, because knowing he believes in Christ, I don't have to worry that crystals might be somehow against Christ. And his assistant, this girl, kept asking him, should we tell him? Should we tell him that we want him what we want him to do? Finally, we said yes. So the girl said, your forces are with us. You've got to come to Tibet with us. You have the ability to do great things. And then they do talk about needing people to support their studies. So do you think they're going to ask me for money? That's it? Bernshon is so materialistic. The new laser beam record players and their new apartment. Then they tell me I was Chinese in my other life and I have to go to Tibet with them. Look, I know the people are ridiculous, but it's the crystals I believe in. They do work. When you think that these crystals were in the center of the earth and have all this energy. What the fuck? Mr. Thursday, April the 25th, 1985. Mr. Bernson says he doesn't want to be associated just with crystals because he could lose his license. He said that in Massachusetts, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Hardest word in the world to say. People have lost their licenses. But I mean, if you believe in something, it seems kind of funny if you don't take the consequences. I'm trying to find another store that sells the sculpture of the Last Supper that's about 1.5 feet. They're selling it in one of those important stores on 5th near Lord and Taylor, but it's so expensive there, about $2,500. So I'm trying to find it cheaper in Times Square. I'm doing the Last Supper for Lollas. For Lucio Amalio, I'm doing the volcanoes. So I guess I'm a commercial artist. I guess that's the score. He must be loaded. Why does he care about spending $2.5 grand on this? I always find that interesting. When
well, again, I mean, I think the very wealthiest people they're wealthy for a reason. Warhol was always extraordinarily concerned. Like, one of his biggest fears was going broke. And I think, of course, people who grow up in the circumstances in which he grew up, basically poor, working class, and having worked his way up, I think you're always, either you're going to be someone like Jean-Michel who just blows everything, or you're going to be someone like Warhol who is extraordinarily conscious of the fact that it could all disappear tomorrow. So, I mean, even though he did spend profligately, I mean, he did spend a lot of money on things, but he was also extraordinarily miserly. And I think that combination is that's how you get rich and stay rich. Yes,
miserly. Okay. I find it is true though. People who've got a lot of money tend to be quite measly with it.
Yeah. I like this. I like this picture. So I don't know what. There's another one of those weird modeling images where he's made up as a zombie, but he's also wearing his crystal openly, which he didn't do very often. So, double shot. But I love I love zombie Warhol.
Yeah. Oh, something happened. Hold on.
Oop, 99.
Happened here.
I don't know.
My computer's crashed, D.
Uh-oh.
Windows Explorer's crashed. What the hell?
Whoa.
Yeah, it's refusing to do anymore. It's like, that's
right.
Your time's up.
The time's
up, D, sadly.
Oh dear, oh dear.
But I can't even get into anything. My entire computer's frozen. But I can't touch anything, so we're just stuck here for all time.
For all eternity, staring at a white screen.
Okay.
Are you all right?
Okay.
Because this is the last of the things about crystals and things.
Let me see if I can find it.
99.
Right. Is this the right one?
Monday, November 4th, 1985.
No. Hold on. That was 199.
Yeah, 99. Oh my god.
199. Oh, it's gone. 99 doesn't want to open.
99 doesn't want to open. So, shall I read it?
Yeah, you read number 99 because it's not opening for me.
Okay, that's very odd.
Yeah.
I could send it to you on Twitter if you want to show it. I don't know. Should I do that?
No, just read it.
All right.
At this point, yeah.
Monday, November 4th, 1985. Saw Dr. Lee. So Dr. Linda Lee was another one of these sort of naturopath, homeopath, alternate medicine doctors that he saw. She was Chinese. Saw Dr. Lee and didn't tell her about the horrors of the past week. And she checked me out and pulled on my fingers and said I was perfectly aligned. So after what I went through, either I'm very strong or laughs, she is. She said my crystal had been invaded, that it was low on energy and that I had to put it in the sun to recharge it. You put the quote share crystal on with your head back. You can't be standing up. You throw your eyes back until you'll see yellow. She's worried about the same things Bernstein is: liver, kidneys, large intestine. And instead of my brother being the invader, I think it was the girl in the bookstore. They said my brother was going to invade the crystal soon. And I thought, well, maybe, because I'd said some things in an interview about my nephew who left the priesthood to marry a Mexican nun. And I thought maybe that had made my brother mad. But I think what was invaded was the girl. We'll get to that thing about the girl in the bookstore next time. Lee and Bernson don't overlap. Dr. Lee is better. She could have gotten into crystals, but she went into kinesiology, and she massages pressure points, and she's a nutritionist. And Edmund Goultney went to a real doctor yesterday after going to a homeopathic one for a long time. He's sick. It's scary. I don't know. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they started putting gays in concentration camps. All the fags will have to get married so that they won't have to go away to camps. It'll be like for a green card. So there you go. That's an early mention, of course, the AIDS epidemic in New York in the 1980s, which is again another subject that crops up a lot in the diary, as various people in Warhol's circle succumbing to AIDS very quickly. But yes. I like Warhol musing about having to get married to avoid the concentration camps.
I'm having extreme troubles here for some reason on everything. My system seized up for reasons unknown.
Why don't you might want to do a restart after the streams?
Yeah.
Hello.
Can you hear me, D?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
You can hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm all sorts of weird things are happening at the moment, including my audio driver saying, "Oh, we've got problems." The hell, I mean,
wow.
maybe my computer's just decided I'm going to pack in right now.
Dear, dear.
Anyway, let us hit some super chats and get out of here. Because there will be a part 8. Yiz the Eunuch says, it is the year 2025. First it was a unique artist. Then it was we must be thorough. We are now on stream 95 of 2 streams to flatten the Warhol. I am AA's last subscriber. This is my story. Yiz the Eunuch says, Raw Satch tests are academic hogwash. That image was clearly an angry mother burning his son with a cigarette because the father left them. Anybody could see that. Little winky face. My gosh. Here's the Eunuch says, the Pescatarian Church, PEC, is a member of the Church Worldwide Anglers Communion. It is a Protestant denomination and is divided into 9 rivers and lakes. Wikipedia.
Lol. Very good. Very good.
Okay. There is also couple of other super chats. Hibernian Perspective says, I'm sorry, my mistake. There are commonly 14 stages of cross. Jesus dies on the 12th. He is taken down on the 13th.
Yes.
Turned in the spelcher on the 14th. Perhaps Warhol found significance in the 12th. Well, I'm sure Semiagog can talk for 3 hours about the significance of the number 12.
Yeah, that occurred to me. I said that there were 12 stations of the cross, but yes, that's not true. So I forgot to correct myself. But yeah,
I know 12 is a sacred number in Shia Islam because it's the 12. It's the 12 religion, believe it or not.
Oh, is it the 12th Imam? Is that where that?
Yeah, the 12. They're called 12ers. Remember. The number 12. I mean, all the numbers have various significances, but I know 12 is big in Shia Islam.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, but I'm sure that you could have an esoteric stream on the number 12 for many hours. Yes.
But could you do 8? Could you do 8 parts?
8 parts on the number 12. Well, I'm just having a look. I'm just having a look at the number 12 on Wikipedia, and it's got a very, very full entry. To be honest, 12 days of Christmas, of course.
Yeah.
There are 12 great feasts in the Eastern Orthodox calendar.
Oh.
There are 12 Olympians of the pantheon of gods.
Oh yes.
In the pantheon, 12 Olympians. There were 12 Titans. So there were 12 apostles, as we talked about.
Yeah.
Ishmael, the first born son of Abraham, had 12 sons and princes. Jacob has 12 sons. There are 12 tribes of Israel.
Oh.
From those 12 sons that Jacob had, the 12 tribes of Israel.
12 to 12 tones, 12
Yeah.
12 musical
This
tones,
is
12
reflected.
inches. Yeah.
The 12 tribes of Israel is reflected in Christian tradition by the 12 apostles. When Judas Iscariot is disgraced, a meeting is held in Acts to add Saint Matthias to complete the number 12 once more. The book of Revelation contains much numerical symbolism, and many of the numbers mentioned have 12 as a divisor. So, yeah, 12 is big in Revelation as well. In Hinduism, the sun god, Surya, has 12 names. The monkey god has 12 names. There are 12 petals on the chakra. So, yeah, I mean, Odin had 12 sons in King Arthur. In Arthurian legend, Arthur was said to subdue 12 rebel princes. He won 12 great battles against Saxon invaders. In Shia Islam, there are 12 imams, etc. So yes, there are lots of there are 12 months in the calendar, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, so the number 12 of great significance in the history of world religion, especially Abrahamic religions.
Yes, and of course, and being divisible by 3 and 6, and obviously 3 and 6 are big numbers as well. 666 and the Trinity and all of these things. So yes, that numerology does seem to be very important.
I am experienced not responding again. Can anybody read the last super chat? I can't see it. Somebody sent it like a super chat on YouTube, but I'm hitting.
No, I can't.
All of my system is broken down for some reason. Something's happened, obviously on a great scale here. So
I hope everything's all. Oh, I see it. Okay, D's bit of rough for £5 says, finally able to catch this live. I have thoroughly enjoyed these, Mr. D, as I knew very little of Warhol at the start. Also, Evelyn Day was great. AA, woo. Well, that's very nice.
Thank you very much, D's bit of rough. It means so much. And it also means so much that you're not being lewd for once in your life.
I know. It's like a first genuine super chat from D's bit of rough. Also, Yiz the Eunuch says, there are 12 parts to the Andy Warhol stream. No. So yeah, I'm afraid. I was bitching on Twitter earlier about the kind of rump of AA fans who take offense to this series. I understand that it, of course, ballooned up into being something quite beyond what we ever imagined it would. But I think that obviously we find something to talk about for 3 hours.
There are people, D, who now hold vigils to the idea of Pharaoh and AA advert streams. Do you remember those?
Yeah, I love those streams. I wish you would do more of them. I mean, if you feel like people need a break, obviously we could, we can reconvene in 2 weeks or something. But
on that subject, next week I'm away again because do you remember the holiday that was cancelled? The second part of it is happening next week, so
okay. All right,
we'll have to reconvene in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah. We also we could do the last part pre-recorded. I don't know how you feel about that, but
yeah. And there we go. Well, thank you very much for everyone. Hope you've enjoyed this. You can buy courses at the Academic Agency. Autumn 25 is the current. It's kind of like DFS because of the bloody. I was delayed getting into the lodge, so that this sale has gone on like a month longer than I wanted it to. But people have benefited by saving money, I suppose. Also buy a mug, join the channel, but most importantly of all, get out. If I can end the stream. My end button's not working, D.
You have to stream forever.
We're stuck. Oh my no.
Dear oh dear.
I can't end the stream.
What are we gonna do?
I may have to come out and go back in.
Should we do a few numbers from Kiss Me Kate or something? I have to take a cement fix, be a standing cinema, Dress my friends up just for show. Hello. Oh my god, I'm alone. It's my channel now. I've taken over. Very strange. I've never been alone on a stream before. Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker for $2. Very generous. Says AA's nightmare. Can't leave endless super chats. Yeah, it's everyone's greatest nightmare. This is great. I love this. Should we say forbidden words that gets AA's channel deleted? Shall I say something like Nebuchadnezzar? Or